And you're muted.
Arn
Yeah,
is,
He is muted.
Yeah.
he's not muted on the
Looks
thing.
like he actually physically muted his own mic, not the.
I blame the snake.
The snake says if I can't talk anymore, neither can you.
Well, anyways, hello, puppies and kittens, and welcome to another episode of Blasphemers Bible. And we have the usual panel today, but we also have Ember, who we have not seen in a while. How are you, Ember?
Howdy, howdy. Yeah, I've missed the Tuesday shows because I've been stuck at work on Tuesdays.
Yeah, that's a bummer.
Having
We're
a
stuck.
job.
This is why jobs should be illegal.
It's
Anyways,
true.
Absolutely.
Yay, capitalism.
So
Robots
today-
should do everything, and we should all get a guaranteed basic income that's like 20% above necessary living conditions.
That sounds exactly like Canada, and I agree. And
No, that's what Canada should be. We spent too much time saying, at least we're not as bad as the States, and then that just keeps us degenerating, which is a terrible idea.
that's also true, though. Like, definitely not as bad as the States.
Yeah, but that's not a high bar, love. I'm
That is
sorry to
true.
tell you.
is
That's
true.
the bar is in hell.
Accurate.
We should be aiming up, not down.
Oh,
Right? Yeah.
finally a definition for hell.
If we
but
should
today
be
we're
aiming
doing
up,
Joshua
so
9.
we just lost
Florida.
Arn.
Florida.
Isaac turned
That's
into
okay.
a
Lose our
spinning
options.
It's getting
circle.
better from here.
I mean,
Yeah.
it can't get worse
Well,
than
There we
this.
go.
Yeah, now we have
All
to
right, is
find
everyone alive?
find Arn again
there's
and
Aaron, and he's
move him
still
up through
silent.
the ranks.
Did you physically mute your mic somehow outside of the software? Because I don't see the little mute icon by your name in the backstage.
Right, that's what I'm guessing. Like he clicked mute on his physical microphone instead of on.
I don't think his mic does that though.
Oh,
I
no.
have that.
No.
I have that mic too. But I
Okay,
did
well,
hear that
check
he's
your
got some
settings.
new technology that's supposed to be muting background noises. I think if I heard
Like a
read
noise gate?
correctly on Facebook.
Hmm.
So maybe that's what's happening.
Usually noise gates aren't that exclusive, but okay. I mean,
Oh,
Arn's
noise
got a
gates
pretty loud
have
booming voice.
been tricky lately too.
Arn,
But have
either
you
way.
tried unplugging it and plugging it back in?
Arn
That's-
does.
You know what?
Yeah,
actually,
Arn does have dogs who do the technical things for him, like unplugging the
Maybe they
internet.
kicked one of the. I did see them wandering around. Maybe they kicked one of the plugs to something. Yes, unfortunately your faux coral snake is trying to run down the back of the chair. See, this is why Arn should always wear the horns so that the snakes have something to curl
Right.
around.
Make
besides
it
his
like
throat.
an apiary kind of thing. Yeah.
You know, he's done it before. He absolutely had the horns, and the snakes were like, "Ooh, fun times." Happy joy joy. Oh. Well, we'll get our
Yeah.
technical issues sorted out, and then hopefully we can.
For everyone in
That's our
chat,
beautiful
we
story
might
today.
be able to iron out the technical issues within the 2 hours allotted to the show. So
Yeah,
stick
we
with us.
might. Until then,
Until then,
I got my big Arn boots on for today. So
oh yeah.
we are doing Joshua 9, and we might get to Joshua 10. Unsure about that. That remains to
It's
be
3
seen.
hours, so I think we will.
Oh, but
Yeah, possibly.
have we told them the good news? It's one of the chapters in Joshua where there's no genocide.
No, but the next one.
What?
Yeah, no, just 9. 10 is totally, they doubled down. You know,
No,
it's-
in 9 they're planning for genocide.
right. But they
gearing
managed
up.
to sneakily get around and avert the genocide. Well, the other people do. They managed to not get genocided by being sneaky. Yay?
Yeah.
And you know why that is, right?
Because
They read the other chapters and they knew what was coming.
They just built an altar, so they just came from worshiping God. So
right.
there's a bit of let's have a bit of pause here of the genocide, but it didn't last too long apparently.
No, they're all filled with holy fervor. And
yeah. As is
that
tradition.
sounds right. As is
So who's gonna read today? Is it Arn?
Now you're just
Pretty sure
being
you want him
mean.
as number 2.
True.
It's just
true.
rude. It's just rude.
I am just being.
Oh, and
Where
we
did
lost
Tomer
the
go?
Tomer.
And we lost Tomer. What a great day.
This
I mean,
is-
we were-
this is
well, I mean, I
technical
think
difficulties
Arn has
never
been
end.
issues.
Gonna be
Yes.
the only one with commentary.
Yeah.
It will help us get through more chapters, I suppose.
Actually, you know what, Ember? You have not been here in a while. You got
That is
this.
true. All right. I'm just gonna go for it until Tomer tells me to stop.
No.
Everyone-
I'm gonna go for it. You're Ember. You need to stick with.
Oh, I was so confused.
That's good. That's quite
Oh
funny.
my God! Both of
Yeah,
you, go to your
yeah.
rooms.
This is
I forgot I also
really,
have internet
really,
issues.
yeah, because we haven't had that yet. Internet
Almost as
issues.
if God doesn't want us to read this chapter.
Right,
Mhm,
yeah,
mhm.
yeah. He's like,
have
oh
no
shit, I
problem
know
with
they're
all the
getting to the
genocide-y
crazy part in
chapters.
Joshua 10.
It's way too peaceful.
That's
He's
right.
like, oh, I hate this chapter. It's too boring.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So God hates the chapter without genocide.
Arn does too because he left again.
God is like,
Hell with this, I'm out, he says.
Well, the thing is, he's afraid of us getting to chapter 10 and being like, hey, this is literally impossible. That's what he's afraid of. For
Yeah.
science.
God is
For
like,
science!
I would have got away with it. I would have got away with it too, if not those meddling Gibeonites.
Those meddling Gibeonites. That's solid.
If not for them, he
Gibeonites
would
of the
have got them
Scooby-Doo
all.
Club. All right. Let's get reading, and our illustrious leader will join us as he can.
All right.
Indeed,
All right,
indeed.
Ember, onto you.
All right.
Read up to 15.
Cool. Now, when all the kings west of the Jordan heard about these things, the kings in the hill country, in the western foothills, and along the entire coast of the Mediterranean Sea as far as Lebanon, the kings of the Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, they came together to wage war against Joshua and Israel. However, when the people of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, they resorted to a ruse. They went as a delegation whose donkeys were loaded with worn-out sacks and old wineskins cracked and mended. They put worn and patched sandals on their feet and wore old clothes. All the bread of their food supply was dry and moldy. Then they went to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal and said to him and the Israelites, "We have come from a distant country. Make a treaty with us." The Israelites said to the Hivites, "But perhaps you live near us, so how can we make a treaty with you?" "We are your servants," they said to Joshua. But Joshua asked, "Who are you, and where do you come from?" They answered, "Your servants have come from a very distant country because of the fame of the Lord your God. For we have heard reports of him, and all that he did in Egypt, and all that he did to the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, Sihon, king of Heshbon, and Og, king of Bashan, who reigned in Ashtaroth. And our elders and all those living in our country said to us, 'Take your provisions from your journey, go and meet them and say to them, we are your servants. Make a treaty with us,' because servants always give orders. This bread of ours was warm when we packed it at home on the day we left to come to you, but now see how dry and moldy it is. And these wineskins that we filled were new, but see how cracked they are. And our clothes and sandals are worn out by the very long journey." The Israelites sampled their provisions, but did not inquire of the Lord. Then Joshua made a treaty of peace with them to let them live, and the leaders of the assembly ratified it by oath.
Can you
Okay,
hear me
I have
now?
to. Yes, finally.
Yes!
We can hear you.
Okay.
Ah.
What happened was my wife installed software that was supposed to block out the sound of barking dogs.
Mm-hmm.
I did nothing. But we're talking. Everything's fine. Everything's working hunky dory. I go and pick up a snake and come back and I'm muted. I didn't do anything. It's just the software decided to activate.
You're too
Well,
dog-like,
it
Arn.
detected you as the barking dog.
Yes. You're too dog-like. That's
It was on. It was on before all this happened. I don't
When
know
we were
what the
talking
hell-
backstage.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we were talking backstage, and then just arbitrarily decided to go off.
Oh, and I should also point out, Ember, it's I. It's not A.
That's hence the I jokes earlier. I see.
Yeah, I mean, Mark,
AI.
Mark,
It was
did-
AI.
M- Mark also said AI previously. So
Which admittedly is funnier, but yeah, I have to wonder, like, how long was it between the destruction of Ai and these people coming? Because they mentioned having heard of it, and somehow they then also had the time to travel so far that they had cracked wineskins and moldy bread, and all their clothes were worn out. And also, who did they just have moldy stale bread lying around? Did they like go to everyone in the city and say, "Can someone find us the oldest possible stale bread?"
well,
And
it
we just
depends.
I
eat it?
mean, who doesn't keep around some moldy bread? You know,
It depends on how
especially.
you
Yeah.
read the. It depends on how you read the word, which is just translated to moldy, which is nikudim, which I'll talk about. Some translated as moldy, others crumbly. Some see it as a type of pastry. I'll get to that.
Hmm.
I'm assuming it's at least dry and rock hard.
Yeah, maybe it's a toast.
dwarven
Who
bread.
knows?
Giggity.
Stale bread, basically.
So I think yeah, 'cause one of the things is with them hearing about all their deeds, right? Not only did they just hear about what happened, but they also heard about all the stuff in Egypt too, right?
Mhm.
Then the section about in verses 10 through 11, sorry, verse 10, yeah, so
9
where they
and
kind of
10.
call back to like Sahan and King Og, right? That was in Numbers, somewhere in
Mhm.
Numbers, right?
Yeah, and Deuteronomy.
Yeah, in Deuteronomy as well. So yeah,
Yeah,
so
I
these
don't think they
texts have
mention.
always been linked in some way, and the debate's always about like which one came first, and what how much of each tradition does one take, and that's always kind of been what the debate has been about, at least in terms of the Deuteronomistic history.
Yeah.
It looks like that they actually don't mention Ai or even Jericho. They only say we heard what happened to the Egyptians and the kings on the other side of the river. Right?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I don't think they refer to anything that Joshua did. They just
Okay,
refer
yeah,
to the
no, you're
stuff that
right.
Moses
Beyond that, we're
did.
beyond the Jordan,
Yeah,
so they've got a couple
the
weeks.
narrator told you beforehand that.
Yeah,
Yes,
they've
yes.
got it. They've got a
Yeah.
couple weeks for their clothes to
I'm
wear out
telling
and
you,
their
they read
wineskins
the
to crack.
script.
Yeah. But I get that I when I read this, I felt that there is a bit of a comic sense here, like a comic type, because you read like their deception and you think that maybe the Israelites were like, that can happen. And when you read that the Israelites did fall for this, it's like, how did you fall for this, right? At least
The
that's how
same
I
way
felt.
God falls for it. You stroke their ego.
Yeah.
Hey, we heard about how strong and powerful you are, and you're just such a big, strong, powerful nation with such a big, strong, powerful God. We're really interested in hooking up with you.
I think where it might play a role, and this may be just getting way too ahead of it, or maybe reading into it a little bit, in the sense that these Gibeonites eventually end up not siding with the other neighboring nations that decided to attack, like and it just reminded me of reading about the Syro-Ephraimite war and how Jerusalem in that case is the one that is spared because it chooses not to side with these other neighbors upon the imminent attack of the Syrians. So I don't know, maybe there's a little bit of a mirroring of some sort here that the authors are just trying to push here, that there's something about remaining loyal or being loyal to Yahweh that spares you in the end somehow.
And and somebody pointed out in the chat that there is also the element of perhaps this is an excuse for why there are still Canaanites in the land for you to be racist against and hate and kill, since this is all being written down later. And if Joshua had done what he was supposed to do, they'd all be eliminated and we wouldn't have them. So you have to have some kind of excuse as to why that's a thing that you still need to worry about if Joshua had indeed come in and chop.
Yeah, and
Speaking
the
of
other thing,
chop, Ember, do you normally have like a goatee or something?
Oh, I used to.
Yeah. Change is bad. Go back.
I disagree.
Or do some contouring, you know?
I was actually going with a lighter look today. I have to mask the shadow, but I wanted to like go kind of natural, like I'm not wearing a whole bunch of makeup kind of thing.
Fair.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So Matt White says moldy bread was used by army doctors to stop wounds festering. Joshua discovered penicillin 500 years early.
Well, I wouldn't say discovered exactly, but there is some substantial evidence that the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Greeks, the ancient Serbians, the ancient Chinese all understood that if you applied moldy stuff to wounds, you could decrease the rates of infection. They didn't know why; it just seemed to work.
Okay. And then Eric Wander offers gifted one RN Raw membership. Okay.
Nice.
Yes, and I got
just
that
wanna say real
membership,
quick,
so
I know.
thank you, Eric
Right.
Wander.
Oh, I see another comment.
Yeah. And then Scarlet De Leon says, hey, all this makes sense. It only took half a bottle of Dewar's, a shot of absinthe, a lack of sleep, and a shot of gin.
Well done.
Okay. That's how we're going to do Bible study then, is it? Okay.
Don't forget to wear your stupid protection.
I have to just say real quick. I notice internet connections as well. If this will again occur, I will have to revert to my laptop, which means crappy microphone. So
Yeah.
I
And so
apologize
Tomer
for
will be
that.
broadcasting from the bathroom again. And so I
Yeah,
figured out what happened. It wasn't that anything that I did. It's that the software, as soon as Peter hit the button to produce the show, that's when the software mutes me. So I can't use it with this program, apparently. Or I can't use it on the show.
Yeah.
Unfortunate. It would be fun to have all the dogs barking behind me and y'all not be able to hear any of that. That would be great. But
For
yeah,
now,
to ruin the magic of the show.
for now, it would be fun if everyone would just stay here, because now we lost Isaac again.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a technical issues episode, I guess.
Yes.
Yep.
Oh.
Isaac wandering in the weeds.
Okay, for all the cat owners, do any of them ever try to get into the ceiling and are really mad about the fact that they can't get into the ceiling? Y'all ever
If you
have
have
that
ceiling
issue?
tiles, yes.
Yeah. This for the past fucking week, this cat has been like jumping up on this desk, like all the way to the top, like trying to get into the fucking ceiling tiles, and I'm like, dude, fuck no, like you're gonna hurt yourself.
He wants a place to hide. The ceiling has maximum like stealth stalking capacity. You could always try putting some sort of a thing he could, like a box he could hide in with only one exit.
I'm gonna channel
somewhere
Tomer and say we're getting off topic.
hide. True.
That never
I mean,
happens here.
I say that if we linger for like 5 minutes. So
Okay, we'll get back to the not a genocide.
yeah, a commentary. That's not technically genocide. So on verse 1, when all the kings heard about these things, the Hebrew Bible reads, and when all the kings heard. It does not state what they heard, but it can be assumed that they've heard what Joshua did to Jericho and Ai, as in according to Kara, Gersonides, and Ahituv. Septuagint adds kings of the Amorites, which according to Butler is a term for all pre-Israelite occupants.
See that.
On that same verse, Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, etc., Septuagint adds the Girgashites, resulting in a 7-nation list found in Genesis 10:16, 15:21, and Deuteronomy 7:1, with a different order. On verse 2, Ahituv writes that what is described here didn't happen. In the Gibeonite War, only 5 kings of the mountains and the Shephelah were gathered to fight against Israel in 10:5. He writes that the author does not rely on historical reliability and accuracy, and uses the imagery that all the Canaanite kings fought against Israel as if they were a single person. On verse 3, the people of Gibeon, so Givon, that's the Hebrew name Gibeon, is mentioned here for the first time. Dozeman notes that the references to Gibeon in the Bible indicate its importance during the monarchic period. It was located in the region of the tribe of Benjamin and is used as background to the conflict between the houses of David and Saul, as seen in 2 Samuel 2, verses 12 to 24, 3:30, and 28. This conflict disappears in stories associated with Solomon, where Gibeon is a cultic center for the king of Jerusalem, seen in 1 Chronicles 3:5 and 9:2. This, as well as remarks by the chronicler in 1 Chronicles 8:29 to 32, 9:35 to 44, 16:39, and 21:29, indicates a close relationship between Gibeon and Jerusalem. During the exilic period, Gibeon again turns to a place of conflict when Ishmael ben Netaniah, the assassin of Gedaliah, is killed at the pool of Gibeon, Jeremiah 41, verses 12 and 16. The close connection between Gibeon and Jerusalem continued during the post-exilic period, according to Nehemiah 3:7 and 7:5. There is no mention of a Gibeonite king in this verse, although Abravanel thinks that their king was the Hivite king, since they are called Hivites in verse 7. But the Gibeonites rebelled against him by making a treaty with Israel. Ahituv writes that the Gibeonites did not have a monarchical regime, but were ruled by elders and perhaps also by a general assembly, as seen in verse 11. Since Gibeon was not a royal city, and the reader might err and disregard its importance, it is described as a great city, as one of the royal cities in 10:2. On verse 4, they resorted to a ruse. The Hebrew for ruse is orma. This word can also mean craftiness or prudence, according to BDB Dictionary, or cunning by Butler and Dozeman. Targum renders acted with wisdom. Rashi notes that this is similar to what the sons of Jacob did with Hamor, the father of Shechem, who was a Hivite, according to Genesis 34, verses 1 to 26. Zakovitch proposed that there is a hint to Rachav's deception in chapter 2. Butler notes the two-sided meaning of the root Ein Resh Mem, which could be seen as both positive, as in Proverbs 15:5 and 19:25, and negative, Job 5:13 and Psalms 83:4. From the Gibeonites' point of view, they are acting wisely, but for the Israelites, it is deceptive and wrong.
Yeah, so so I think it's translated well as like cunning, right?
Yeah.
Because like they're smart, but they're dicks.
Yeah, that's also
Well,
Jason, is it?
I mean, I don't think they're jokes, but I can see how from the
Yeah,
perspective of they're like they're getting around what we wanted to do, and we wanted to. Now we swore an oath, and we can't kill them. It's kind of funny how one of the only moral consistencies is that you have to keep your oaths, even if they're stupid.
Oaths were like the most important fucking thing, like across the ancient world. Like not only in the ancient Near East, but like in Greece as well. Like they were so important that they could even like end legal proceedings, like if you swore an oath. Because like the thing is, like they would be like, I invoke like destruction upon myself if I'm lying or something like that.
Yeah.
And then shocker, they wouldn't get destroyed. And then they're like, oh well, shit, if he's not getting harmed by the gods right away, obviously.
It's interesting a thought that even gods were bound by oaths. It's like that was the one thing powerful enough to affect a god. Potentially, I mean, if the god took an oath,
Yeah,
and
and I
the
think
power of like a god's promise is like a huge thing in the ancient world.
And I think there's precedence in Mesopotamian religions where there was oath giving and pacts happening, not necessarily between the gods and people, but among gods as well. I think was kind of the background to this culture eventually.
and
It's
not
funny how
just
these religious people don't hold to that now. I mean, like say if a group that was almost entirely conservative Christian were to make a profound statement of like say that you would not elect a Supreme Court judge so close to the election, but then when it's the other term you get to choose the judge, well then you can, even though it's closer to the election.
Or when those same judges, who also very strongly believe in the power of oaths for both religious and legal reasons, say, oh no, this certain case is already decided law, and then immediately overturn said case.
Yeah, Yeah.
Yeah.
Wish they could stick to their word.
Hmm.
Yeah, the oaths of the religious, there's nothing more unreliable than the oaths of the faithful. But in fairness, as it were, the swearing of an oath or a vow is a little more dramatic than, although not in the case of those judges, they spoke under oath in their proceedings. But it's, yeah, I mean, this is something universal, though, in ancient mythologies. Odin swearing that, because of something with him and Loki, that you had to, he wouldn't accept hospitality anywhere Loki did not also receive hospitality in the actual mythology, not the MCU, where he isn't his kid, but they do have a horse baby together. No, wait, that was, never mind.
No,
that wasn't
he
him.
he
That
had a
was,
baby with a horse, and the horse was
no, and the horse was, but it's the horse, it's the eight-legged horse baby, and then Odin rides it, which is awkward. But anyway, I know that's just very odd. Mythology is weird, but the power of oaths is definitely something here that you can, if an actual oath is invoked and sworn and ratified in all the proper ways, whatever that may be for that culture, it is binding beyond anything else, which is why Jephthah had to kill his daughter, because he went and said a stupid oath.
Child
And
sacrifice.
And it's also interesting how it usually would involve the splitting of an animal as part of the ritual.
Like in
Like
with Abraham and the dividing the animals and walking down the middle, sort of a, so may it be done to me also if I break my word, yada yada yada. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
all right. What verse are we up to?
Yeah, I have commentary on verse 4. So they went as a delegation. The Hebrew it's vayelchu vayitztayiru or vayitztayaru. While the word vayelechu means and they went, the word vayitztayaru is more difficult. Some, like most traditional commentators, Dozeman and Nelson, suggested deriving it from the root tzil, which means envoy or messenger, and so read disguise oneself as a messenger. JPS reads from the root tzadik yud resh, to paint, and so they set out in disguise. Early translations and some Hebrew manuscripts read vayitztaidu, and they supplied themselves. This reading is supported by Kara, Ahituv, Butler, and Zakovitch, although Nelson views it as a confusion between the letters Dalet and Resh.
Yeah, so it looks like, so I'm not gonna try to pronounce this Hebrew, but it could mean like, that they painted themselves, or disguised themselves. But the emendation, which seems more plausible, especially given the prominence of the cognate Said provisions in this episode. So Alter and SBL translates it as prepared provisions for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
We have a comment from Matt White who says this Canaan, is this the same Canaan where the water to wine trick happened?
No, that's
that was a new Canaan.
No, that's Cana. Canaan is an entire region. Cana was a city. We haven't identified Cana, but we know it's not the entire fucking region.
But it was in Canaan.
Although there is Kfar Kana in Israel, so maybe it's like close to there. Okay, so on verse 5, the bread of their food supply was dry and moldy. The word for moldy is nikudim, which is understood as either moldy by the Septuagint, Peshitta, and Kimchi, or crumbly by the Vulgate, Targum, Gersonides, Dozeman, and Nelson. Rashi and Kara wrote that nikudim refers to bread burnt as toast, which would preserve it over a long time.
That's too bad that means moldy bread, because that sounds like a really good name. Nikudim.
Actually, there is a mathematician named Nikodim whose theorem, Rado Nikodim theorem, is well known. So
the
moldy bread theorem.
Well, Nikodim, not Nikodim, but yeah.
Okay.
So the same word used for the vowel points, more or less. Like,
maybe.
Okay.
And I have Ahituv, who, based on 1 Kings 14:3, writes that this was a certain type of pastry. And Butler comments, Knauf finds the Gibeonites playing the role too well to be believable, and notes that meal not bread, would be taken on a long journey. This makes it improbable that Joshua and Israel's leaders should not have seen through the Gibeonite charade. Knauf thus joins chapter 2 and 9 to conclude that Joshua accepted almost any reason not to carry out the oath of destruction. On verse 6, and said to him and the Israelites. The phrase translated to Israelites is Ish Yisrael, Ish Yisrael, literally a man of Israel, according to Targum and Butler. Dozeman writes that this phrase is unusual and likely designates a collective rather than an individual, as seen in the Septuagint, Peshitta, Vulgate, and Nelson. Ahituv writes that this designates the judicial body of Israel, as seen in Judges 8:22. And Butler comments, the expression man of Israel is a collective, often referring to the Israelite army, seen in Judges 7:23, 9:55, 1 Samuel 13:6, and 2 Samuel 17:24, etc. A military undertone may be present in all uses of the term, but a few passages, seen in Judges 8:22, 21:1, 2 Samuel 16:18, etc., may support G. Schmidt's contention that the expression represents more clearly than others the democratic element in Israel's society. R. Sutherland finds it to be the marker of the original oral story based in Gilgal and referring to the military in Benjamin. Schmidt could be correct in saying that the expression is used in the early years of the monarchy, and then again in Deuteronomistic literature, though the understanding of what constitutes Deuteronomistic literature is still debated.
Yeah, or it's just more likely it's a Deuteronomistic invention.
Okay. On that same verse, make a treaty with us, in Hebrew, Kirtulanu Brit. Zakovitch comments, it is still not clear why they wish to be viewed as people from a distant land, nor why they want to make a treaty with the Israelites. The terminology indicates that this is not a treaty between equals, and that those who arrive acknowledge the superiority of the Israelites. A similar language is used by the besieged citizens of Jabesh Gilead when they plead with Nahash the Ammonite, quote, make a treaty with us and we will serve you, end quote, in 1 Samuel 11:1. The warning not to make treaties with the inhabitants of the land is repeated in many texts, such as Exodus 23:32, 34:12 and 15, Deuteronomy 7:2, and Judges 2:2. On verse 7, the Israelites said, Hebrew Bible uses the man of Israel again. The Ketiv uses the plural form of said, vayomru, but the Kere uses the singular, vayomer. Septuagint, Peshitta, Vulgate, followed by Butler, Dozeman, and Nelson, prefer reading the Ketiv. They said. Targum reads the Kere, he said. On the Hivites, Nelson writes that the mention of the Hivites underscores the peril by pointing back to the list of verse 1, which in turn points directly back to Deuteronomy 2017. Deuteronomy 2017 list of those nations to be annihilated. Septuagint has Horite, which according to Dozeman is a group that is associated with Seir in the region of Edom, east of the Jordan, seen in Genesis 14:7, 36:20 and 29, Deuteronomy 2:10-12, and not one of the indigenous nations. Butler writes that this discrepancy between Horite and Hivite has prompted a debate whether the Hivites are a distinct ethnic group or that the term is a corruption of Horite. Zakovitch proposed that Hivite is original, and the Septuagint reading of Horite is a result of confusion between Vav and Resh. Rabbi Eliezer in Talmud Yerushalmi Kiddushin 4:1 derives the word chivi from the Aramaic chivia, which means snake, specifically the snake in the Garden of Eden. Thus, they are called Hivites because they cheated Israel just as the serpent cheated Eve.
Oh.
So they were nice to Israel and gave them knowledge, and the Israelites didn't appreciate it?
Well, they
Evil knowledge.
evil knowledge that led to the Israelites not committing quite as much genocide as God wanted, and how dare they? Although
Oh,
it's
they
nice to
probably
hear.
they probably gave them moldy bread technology, which hindered the genocides because it saved lives.
Oh yeah, we can't have. Well, you can save lives, but only specific lives, and if God says it's okay. I do have to point out the the irony and frankly hypocrisy of complaining about being deceived based on a nation who is supposedly came from a man, Jacob, whose name literally means trickster and deceiver. There's
Not really.
well, liar or what have you. I mean, he is
No.
the
It's
entire
okay.
story was with
I mean
all
the
the
story, yeah, but the name, no. I
Okay,
don't
well,
think so.
I'll look back in Genesis, but I'm pretty sure it meant something like that. Anyway,
Well, I mean,
I mean,
you are
it means
Canadian
people of
arguing
the.
with a Jew about what a word in Hebrew means.
no,
I should
I
also check this
remember
as
in the
well.
text it talked about how he was,
Yeah, but
you
that's
know,
not from the name itself, I don't think.
mm, we'll look back in Genesis, but
Yeah.
it's the idea of being clever and getting around things is good when Israel does it. And that, that's how you survive. But it's
I
nice
think
to
the
hear that at
confusion
least
is
one complaint is that Joshua didn't want to commit quite as much genocide as he was supposed to.
yeah, I think it's because his Yaakov it means like ankle, and it refers to when he grabbed his brother's ankle.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was saying.
Yeah.
Oh, right, his brother's ankle. Yeah, but there was something about
Yeah,
I'll
it
And
look
then
describes
back at
it
it.
as being deceptive. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um
I just wonder, like, what advantage would they had by just kind of making the claim that we come from a land far away, had they not known that this is an issue over disputed land?
I
Like,
know that
how? Yeah, go
God
ahead.
specifically said you're not allowed to make any treaty with the locals. You can only make treaties with people outside of this area because I want you to kill them all and take their land.
Hmm.
But I don't know how they would have known that.
That's my question.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the
Maybe they're
reputation, you might say, well,
prophets.
the kings heard this, but I think what they heard was what they did to Ai and Jericho, but not the insights about, like, there's a promise and it goes from here to there and whatnot.
it could just mean like, oh, they're invading this land. We're like, the next town over. If we pretend to be from far away enough that they're not interested, then maybe we can just get a treaty.
Hmm.
yeah, that's
Or
also follows also follows the rules of Deuteronomy.
Yeah, I'm saying
yeah,
like, yeah, but from the Gibeonites' perspective, they didn't know about Deuteronomy, so it's like,
Yeah.
if this
how
was
did they know to do this
historical
specific
and
trick?
not just narratively convenient because omniscient narrator is omniscient.
Right.
Yeah, but I feel that the writer was, they knew what they were doing, because the fact that they knew to write, not to mention Jericho, because it wouldn't have made sense for them to know about it if they were coming from far away. I feel like the Deuteronomistic writer here at least is trying to make a story that makes sense.
Hmm.
So they're not going to give a character omniscience like that.
Okay,
Yeah.
on verse 8, we are your servants. The Hebrew is avadecha anachnu. The word eved can be understood as either servant or slave. Septuagint has oiketai, which Dozeman renders domestic or household slaves. He writes that this statement indicates that the proposed treaty is between unequal parties, and that the Gibeonites are the weaker party. This language is also attested in 2 Kings 16:7, where Ahaz tells Tiglath-Pileser that he is his, quote, servant slash slave and son, in Hebrew, Avdecha Vibnecha. Butler writes that the Gibeonites used the polite language of ancient Near Eastern diplomacy by referring to themselves as Joshua's servants. Nelson writes that this polite, courtly language will later turn out to have a sharply ironic edge in verse 23. On verse 9, a very distant country. In verse 6, they say they are from a distant country, but here they say they are from a very distant country. Kara and Zakovitch wrote that it seems like they say that their country is so distant that Joshua couldn't know anything about it, and therefore there's no point mentioning its name. Ahituv writes that the Gibeonites are pictured as knowing the Deuteronomic war code, as in Deuteronomy 20, verses 10 to 18. On verses 10 to 13, Nelson comments, as liars often do, they tell partial truths. They really have heard a report, verses 3 and 9, and they did take provisions, verses 45 and 11. Their story is cast into convincing, devout Deuteronomistic language that seeks to indicate that their motives are of the highest. Compare verse 9 with 1 Kings 8:41-42. Of course, the forewarned reader enjoins the irony of their pious claptrap. The two stages of their argument are punctuated by verse 11, which restates the core of the request from verses 6 and 8. Servants covenant by highlighting the provisions in verse 11. The narrative prepares for the upcoming proof, quote unquote, that will clinch Israel's decision in verse 14a. In verses 12 to 13, the Gibeonites use the rhetoric of contrast, then warm and new, now dried up, crumbly split, and end decisively with the concept they are trying to sell, a very long journey. On verse 14, the Israelites sampled their provisions. Hebrew Bible reads, and the men took from their provisions. This could be understood that the Israelites ate from the old food of the Gibeonites, according to Kimchi, Abravanel, Ahituv, and Zakovitch, as eating the food given by the other party is part of the covenant ritual, as seen in Genesis 26, verses 26 to 31, 31:44 and 54, and Exodus 24:11. Dozeman writes that the function of the bread undergoes a strange transformation from proof of a long journey to the basis for a covenant meal. He notes Blenkinsop's opinion that there is a sense of, quote, unreality and even detached humor, end quote. Butler writes that this could be read as testing the evidence of the supplies. Targum, followed by Rashi, Kara, and Ibn Kaspi, read, and the men accepted their words. On that same verse, did not inquire of the Lord, by Urim and Thummim, according to Kara, Ibn Kaspi, and Ahituv. As Zakovitch notes, the Israelites' biggest sin is that they have let their eyesight deceive them and trusted in their knowledge and jurisdiction, but did not ask Yahweh about this. And
Yes,
finally,
how dare they trust physical evidence over God speaking to them via magical divination methods.
and
I
finally,
mean,
on
wouldn't
verse, sorry.
wouldn't that have been a perfect opportunity to pull out the Umin and the Thummim? Be like, hey, should we make this treaty? Yes or no? And do you guys
Ask
know
the
if
magic 8 ball.
right, if this come back to Joshua, like the fact that he did not consult the Lord? I can't think of it, but
Maybe, I think.
I think he just
I don't
gets a
remember.
scolding. I don't think
he
he's
does.
like, he doesn't get cursed or anything. He just gets a scolding.
mhm.
Yeah, but it almost reads like he's not involved. Like they come to the elders and the elders just do it without him. It feels like it almost. I mean, it says he, but it doesn't say who he
Yeah.
is.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
And finally, sorry. Okay, and finally,
Oh, and
my
then
final comment on this part of the chapter, verse 15. Dozeman comments, and it's a bit long. The aim of the Gibeonite trick is to enter into a vassal treaty or covenant with Israel in order to survive the execution of the ban. It is not to receive an unconditional oath from the leaders of the congregation. Therefore, the ceremony between the Gibeonites and Israel reaches its conclusion in verse 15a, when the covenant of peace between the men of Israel and Joshua is established. For this reason, the concluding comment in verse 15b, that the leaders of the congregation, quote, swore an oath, end quote, to the Gibeonites, appears out of place, as though it is an addition to the covenant ceremony that occurs after the fact. Many commentators view the change in theme from covenant to oath and the change in central characters from Joshua and the men of Israel to the leaders of the congregation as a compositional addition to the story by an author representing the perspective of the priestly literature from the Pentateuch. The changes, however, are not compositional. They provide insight into the polemical aim of the author against the leaders of the congregation, who voluntarily secured the cultic role of the Gibeonites with an unconditional oath. The unconditional oath of the leaders contrasts to the conditional covenant or vassal treaty made by Joshua and the men of Israel. And that's it for my part.
Okay, we have a comment from Trevor Wright. It says, chapter 23 says, now be ye cursed, and there shall not cease to be servants of hewers of wood and drawers of water for the house of my God. The curse is God's will, even when it fails. No comment
I mean,
about
they're
that.
going to be
Surprised.
cursed at the end of this chapter,
I
no?
think it's verse 23, not chapter.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Eh,
we'll
oh,
read it, but it's
Yeah.
yeah, God cursing them for surviving is pretty par for the course. I can't I'm sorry, I can't even muster surprise about that.
I mean, it
doesn't
sounds
even
like
hit my
another
mark.
etymology for a nation that had been made subject to for a long time. And okay, this is why.
Mm-hmm.
Do you mean
What's-
etiology?
What's that word?
There you go.
Yeah.
Ideology.
ideology.
Etymology is something
Something
else.
else. That's
History
the,
of
that's
the
the
word,
word
yeah.
thing.
It's
Yeah.
the origin of the name or of the word rather than
Uh,
the.
before we move on, anybody wants to listen to what Origin has to say?
Oh boy.
Oh, let's hear
Oh,
the crazy
please.
Christian.
Yes.
So, okay, the Gibeonite salvation secured through deception is a figure for those who outwardly serve and minister to the church, yet remain wrapped up in vices.
When-
And
It should be more. It should be more of a parable for people who, fake it till you make it. No, but no, that's a good thing apparently. So
Yeah, that was my minister's philosophy.
oh, and there is another comment by Ambrose. Joshua's deception by the Gibeonites exhibits his admirable innocence of evil.
Oh wow.
Aw,
An
Oof.
admirable
Inno-
innocence
blame
of
him?
evil.
innocence
Admirable.
of evil.
admirable,
Yeah,
yes.
innocence of evil.
Well, you see, he was so caught up in his genocides, he just never thought that someone would tell him a lie.
Yeah, I was like wondering where does Joshua fit on like the scale, like chaotic evil, whatever. Which one is he?
I think
I guess he's
lawful
lawful evil.
lawful evil, because it's
It's
all by
funny
the
when
book.
when I was a young man, when I was in my early 20s or thereabouts, or 19, I think, and we were playing Dungeons and Dragons. I remember going through this, and Curiosity had some kind of study manual to figure out what your alignment actually is, and I was surprised to find that at the time, my real life, not my character, but me, was actually at the time chaotic evil. Had no idea. I thought it was a nice guy.
Hmm.
It was the first of many hints that I was not as nice as I thought.
I mean,
Yeah,
hey,
well-
chaotic evil is honestly the most fun to play, at least in D&D.
I
That's
don't
your
know.
joke.
I like chaotic neutral because then you're not obliged to pursue self-interest. You can just do whatever, especially if it
Yeah,
seems
but I can't be too
weird.
middle of the road.
Mhm.
Yeah, but
Oh
you can
no,
be good
it means you can
for
swing both
selfish
extremes.
reasons.
Yeah. Although it was someone argued for the existence of chaotic lawful. Someone who uses legalistic rules in order to create the most chaos possible.
Mhm.
Oh gosh, I can think of
Anarchist
so many
lawyers.
examples. Yay.
I mean, in a way, we do. We should consider that in antiquity, the concept of a chaotic god was perfectly acceptable. In fact, maybe that was the most reasonable thing to consider within that milieu of there are many gods that govern the world.
And areas and the environment and the ecology would definitely affect the kind of gods you end up with, because it's these
Yes.
forces of nature that you don't understand. Somewhere like Egypt that relies on very regular natural phenomena that are very reliable, and with the exception of a few wild cases, you're always going to have the flood. It comes every year at the same time. Those gods are a lot more chill. They're a lot more reasonable. They're a lot more benevolent. Whereas gods in areas that, depend on rain that does or doesn't come, depending on mountains, depending on complex systems that have extremes that can't be easily predicted, those gods are assholes. They're just the Joker. They just want to watch the world burn.
Mm-hmm.
They'll be nice.
Libertarian gods.
And that's the kind of God Yahweh is. Psychotic fucker.
I think we should move on to the next part.
Next part. Have we finished this chapter?
No, we didn't.
No,
what verse are we on?
Finish the chapter. 16. Finish the chapter,
Okay.
please.
Yeah, we can do that. Let's see. Where do we put 16? Okay.
Where did we put 16?
Mhm.
Okay.
Well, I have a physical book because it's more fun that way.
Okay.
Yeah. 3 days after they made the treaty with the Gibeonites, the Israelites heard that they were neighbors, living near them. So the Israelites set out on the 3rd day and came to their cities, Gibeon, Kephirah, Beeroth, and Kirath Jearim. But the
Eh,
Israelites... Oh, I know I mangled those.
Yeah, continue. We'll get to that, maybe.
But the Israelites did not attack them, because the leaders of the assembly had sworn an oath to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. The whole assembly grumbled against their leaders, but all the leaders answered, "We have given them our oath by the Lord, the God of Israel, and we cannot touch them now. This is what we will do to them. We will let them live, so that God's wrath will not fall on us for breaking the oath we swore to them." They continued, "Let them live, but let them be woodcutters and water carriers in the service of the whole assembly." So the leader's promise to them was kept. Then Joshua summoned the Gibeonites and said, "Why did you deceive us by saying, 'We live a long way from you,' while actually you live near us? You are now under a curse. You will never be released from service as woodcutters and water carriers for the house of my God." They answered Joshua, "Your servants were clearly told how the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you the whole land and to wipe out all its inhabitants from before you. So we feared for our lives because of you, and that is why we did this. We are now in your hands. Do to us whatever seems good and right to you." So Joshua saved them from the Israelites, and they did not kill them. That day he made the Gibeonites woodcutters and water carriers for the assembly to provide for the needs of the altar of the Lord at the place the Lord would choose. And that is what they are to this day.
Yeah, so huge issue here when it comes to the Deuteronomistic history. Not only like do we have again the reference of until this day, but remember what they're saying is happening until this day. This group of people will be under their command essentially until this day. The thing is, this is one of the things pointing towards a pre-exilic layer of the Deuteronomistic history, because during the exile, they certainly would not have said such a thing, that they would be under them until this day. So the reason why this kind of has to be pre-exilic was because that would be like the only time that they would have been able to say that.
I mean, absolutely. You could not have written "they are our slaves until this day" after or during the exile period. But also, I'd just like to point out that we did just lovely establish generational, permanent, race-based chattel slavery. So that's a great precedent to set, guys.
I mean, it was already in the laws from the earlier books, so, you know, there's no problem here.
Yeah, but the idea that this specific racial group is now going to be our slaves forever.
I mean, it's possible, like the very later, post-exilic writers or exilic writers would have maybe realized the problem with saying "until this day" and then realized that they could use it to backtrack what they're writing.
As in to justify, but like the
No,
thing
that-
is, they would have to have had control again of these people. And
No, I'm saying like to pretend that they're writing it now, but they're pretending that it was written.
no, I know
pre-exilic.
what you mean. I know what you mean. But I think with that idea, then it would just be like, well, that'd be kind of a silly thing to write, because then God's command.
They didn't have a
whatever.
tradition that Joshua wrote it. They had a tradition that it was written, let's say, the times of Josiah. So they wanted to add to what they considered authentic Josiah writings, let's say. So they write "until this day," until the time of Josiah, let's say. I don't know. I'm saying it's possible that maybe the later writers could have.
I mean,
They
I
could
just
have written
don't see a
things
reason
later.
that they would do that, but then end up like they would literally make themselves wrong in that case.
Well,
So I don't
if
really
they're
see
trying to pose Yeah, I mean,
Unless I'm not understanding what you're saying.
well, I'm just saying, like, it's possible that if they were trying to write a book and say this was written, we got this book, we inherited it from, before this was written during the First Temple period, like, we've kept this tradition alive. Maybe they want to put in hints saying, oh, when it was written. So,
Oh,
they
okay.
wouldn't. They might realize that they can't write until this day, and make it obvious that they're talking about now. They have to write until this day, and from a fictional point of time.
Okay, I
mean-
see what you're going for.
Yeah.
But again, like, because this is supposed to be like some provision for like all time, essentially, that would make them wrong. And like this would be the same way of, like, in 2 Samuel 7, where they talk about the seed of David being on the throne of
Mhm.
Israel forever, right? Like
Oh, I
that
see
kind
what you're saying.
yeah, that
Yeah.
kind of thing. They wouldn't add that in later during a time that they
They would have
have
known that it
proven
wasn't true.
yeah, they would have proven themselves wrong.
Yeah, I get it. Right.
I mean,
They would have
God
just
tells
left it out
lots of
entirely.
lies in this book, but you wouldn't write him as telling a lie at the time when
Yeah,
that fails. Yeah.
that makes sense.
I mean, I'm reading Papias, which is completely irrelevant to this context here, but he does say when he recounts the whole death of Judas, where he adds all these other extra non-gospel details, like he blew up like the size of a chariot or something because he was all like inflamed, and then he exploded, and then he mentions that the stench of that still in still here until this day, which that doesn't necessarily indicate that this would have been a true um, statement that this actually did happen. So I don't know. I'm with you, Lawrence, but I'm also a little suspicious that perhaps the authors could just intentionally use this type of language, like verisimilitude and things like that, where it'll put us in a chronology without telling us what the chronology is, simply because of those things, those contentions.
I've also seen a couple of modern uses of similar terminology. One is where people will use something like that as a sort of colloquialism, of a way of saying that this is actually a myth. Like when you add to this very day, it's like the meme, and then everyone clapped. It lets people know that you're just storytelling. But I've also seen people use it as a way to say, this thing still exists, so trust me, bro, there is physical evidence.
Yeah. The other thing too is that the way
with
that
the
it
Christian
concludes
writers,
with the Christian writers, yeah. The way that it concludes, and with the
I'm just saying
mentioning
that
of.
with that Christian. Oh,
Go ahead.
sorry, we've got a gap. I'll be quiet.
I'll just say this last thing, that the way that the chapter ends, where it mentions for the community and for the altar of the Lord in the place that he would choose, it's a little suspicious too, because if we flip back a couple of chapters, Joshua just built an altar, and it's way north in Mount Ebal. So wouldn't it have made sense to kind of bring back to that altar, or what happened with that altar? Was it just abandoned? Like, why is that not the altar or the temple at this point?
Well, because remember, are you talking about like narratively speaking or like historically
Yes.
speaking?
Narratively speaking, yes.
Well, then they're setting up. There's a certain place, right, that God is going to set His name. That so that's the place that they are heading for. That's the goal, to get to Jerusalem, to take that over, and then to make that their home base, essentially. So that's in the narrative, and
We're foreshadowing the temple so that they can keep that, stick to our temple worship stuff.
Yeah, and then historically speaking, they would have had to explain, why it was so important to them. Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll start my commentary. Verse 17, on the third day. This is absent from the Septuagint. Zakovitch writes that the translator did not understand that on the third day refers to the last of the 3 days from verse 16. Verse 21, let them live, but let them be woodcutters and water carriers in the service of the whole assembly. Zakovitch comments, on the one hand, the Gibeonites will live according to the covenant's condition in verse 16, but on the other hand, they'll be servants for the assembly. The leaders find a way to calm the assembly down by giving them the Gibeonites as servants. The priestly source has another intention besides its desire to lighten the burden of Joshua's guilt. It wishes to distance the Gibeonites from the sacred and make them the servants of the assembly. Woodcutters and water carriers are mentioned in Deuteronomy 29 verses 9 and 10. These, therefore, are listed together with the strangers, i.e., the Gentiles. On verse 23, the house of my God. Ahituv notes that some commentators understood this as referring to the great shrine at Gibeon, as seen in 1 Kings 3:4. But this is an anachronism. Septuagint replaces the anachronism with for me and my God. Zakovitch writes that this verse could identify the Gibeonites with the Canaanites, the servants of the temple in Jerusalem. Dozeman notes that house of God appears mostly in Chronicles, Ezra, and Nehemiah, where it is always identified with the Jerusalem temple. He notes that Judges 18:31 identifies Shiloh as the house of God, which raises the question whether the phrase here refers to some other cultic temple. He writes, the vast majority of references to the Jerusalem temple suggest that the author of Joshua 9 has fashioned Joshua's curse to be a polemical judgment on the post-exilic Jerusalem temple and its non-Israelite cultic personnel. In this case, the identification of Joshua with the house of my God suggests a critical evaluation of the worship practice of Jerusalem without a complete rejection of the cultic site. On verses 24 to 25, Butler comments, the Gibeonite defense shows their Yahwistic piety, as they paraphrase the Israelite credo. Their inadequate confession deal with what they fear, not with who Yahweh is. They are no different from all the other kings in their reaction to Israel. Terribly frightened, they seek to save their scalps with a clever plan. They submit to Joshua and his judgment in verse 25 and finally tell the truth. In a play off the concluding judge's refrain of 17:6 and 21:25, the Gibeonites tell Joshua to do what is right in his eyes. Thus, they throw themselves on Joshua's mercy, setting the stage for Joshua to become a hero of non-Jews who make statements of faith in Yahweh. And finally, 26 to 27, Dozeman comments, the conclusion of verses 26 to 27 provides the narrator's perspective on the cultic service of the Gibeonites into the present time, until this day. The narrator adds two additional points of information about the Gibeonite service at the house of God. One, they serve the altar of Yahweh, and two, at the place that Yahweh would choose, the place of worship that Yahweh chooses. The place. I read it again. Two, at the place that Yahweh would choose. The place of worship that Yahweh chooses is anchored in Deuteronomy, especially in the law of cultic centralization, where the location of the Jerusalem temple is not explicitly stated as the one place of worship. For example, Deuteronomy 12, 14, 18, and 26. Yet the phrase reappears in the accounts of Solomon's dedication of the Jerusalem temple, 1 Kings 8, 29, and 44, suggesting a close relationship between the law of cult centralization in Deuteronomy and the building of the Jerusalem temple in 1 Kings. And that's it for my commentary.
Anybody else have anything to say about that? Nope.
Am I the only one who finds it disturbing how many excuses we have to find for why we're not killing everyone?
Yeah,
I swear it's okay. They're really kind of pious. We don't have to kill them. We did say the thing, and I swear it's okay. Really.
Well,
you're the Gorgie baby. Oh, you have an orange.
I mean,
it is not his day with the brain cell, is it?
we
Yeah,
have
I
seen
would
how
say that-
Yahweh gets when you don't go kill everyone in sight.
Did you guys see him jump on me?
It's
Like
so
climb
cute.
up on me? Oh my god.
I should note Origin, who writes that these people were made servants is fitting. The condition for their salvation corresponds to the smallness of their faith.
Ugh.
I would say it kind of reminds me of like the whole thing where it's like the people wanted to kill them, but Josh was like, no, we need them, like we can't let them be slaves or whatever. It kind of reminds me of like, you know, the locals murmuring against immigrants and the government being like, oh, for economic reasons, we need them for
Oh my
you
God,
know, to do the
yes.
jobs you wouldn't do,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like
Mm-hmm.
this
Yeah, the
government
people who have
doesn't.
a problem with immigrants don't necessarily have a problem with slaves. What a shock!
Yeah.
We don't see that at all today.
Something I've heard in the, within the Christian church tradition when reading this chapter is one of those lessons that they glean from this. They're looking at the Gibeonites and how they responded to this whole thing by like humbling themselves or giving themselves into slavery as a lesson that us Christians, well, formerly Christian, should follow. Not only that, but that we should follow Jesus' example of being this lowly servant like the Gibeonites, which is crazy to me because these people are like volunteering themselves into slavery. Yet that's the mindset that we ought to have as Christians.
And they're presented
When
as the bad guys.
right,
But also a little bit as the good guys because they were willing to be slaves of God. And were we not told, Mark, were we not told that we were to be slaves to Christ?
that's right.
You know,
Just in
And
the same way that he submits himself unto death, then we
yeah,
ought to unto him.
and
Yeah.
I will boast only of my bonds.
I
Yeah,
once had
it's
I went I
thanks,
once had
Paul.
an argument with a religious woman, and I kind of got frustrated at one point, and I said, the Bible treats you or considers you women as the same as on the same level as like a minor or a slave, and that or a choresh, which is a mute person, and she was like, oh, some great people were slaves.
Oh my God,
oh,
completely
for
missing the
fuck's
point.
sake.
Um,
Yeah.
so, but I think the idea of like why it would have been used as an example, right, is that kind of really fits in with Deuteronomistic theology, being like, oh, this is our deserved punishment for not following properly. So you could easily put the stuff on the or of the Gibeonites
Mhm.
onto like someone as a Christian being like, well, I am I am just sinful flesh, so I gotta surrender myself and whatnot.
I swear there is nothing more degrading than Christianity. Although
And it
you could argue for Islam, but fuck.
and it's so like contradictory because isn't the whole thing like Christ is like the Moses that
Mm.
liberates us from the chains of sin and whatnot, but it's like you're liberating us onto another form of slavery.
Yeah,
Except we
That's
were
all it
never
is.
enslaved
Be
to begin with. They just tell us we were slaves so they have a reason to slip the irons on.
because
yeah, be
for
free
them
from
that second
freedom.
part is
Enjoy your
not.
slavery. You're welcome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for them that second part, the what we would still consider a different type of slavery, like for them that would have been liberation, which is crazy to me.
Compared to
But
what? Genocide.
no, for like in Christianity, right? Like
Yeah.
yeah, so they would.
Yeah, but that's freedom is slavery. You know?
Yes. There, I forget which.
Truth is lies, freedom is slavery, weakness is strength. It's 1984.
Hate is love.
Yep. War
I
is
forget
peace.
And
which
praise Big
book it
Brother.
was in, but there was like this whole part where he describes you being a slave to God, but like also being subservient and stuff like that.
I
Trevor
remember
Wright
in
says,
seminary I had a T-shirt that was in Hebrew, Eved of Christ or something, Eved of Joshua. I mean, it's really part of the identity. It's from the
It
pew
is.
to the ivory towers. It's pretty
It's
clear we're slaves.
110%.
Mm.
It's
Trevor
fucking
Wright says the clever plan that Israel always falls to, and then they blame their neighbors, Gibeon, for their failure. Damn. I should have read that a little better. Yeah. Anyway, are we ready to move on to the next chapter?
Yes, and this chapter is the one with the. First of all, it's the Gibeonite War, and second of all, it's the miracle where the sun stands still. So Aaron is going to enjoy it, or be frustrated by it. It
Rubelicious
depends who he asks.
stepdaddies.
Yeah.
And the hail.
Yeah,
And
the
the
hill.
stepping on the necks kind of reminds me of American History X. If anyone's seen that movie,
Oh,
if there's anything more hateful, I think it would have been that.
all right. Should
Just
we do this
stepping
bit by
on a
bit?
yeah.
Now Adonai-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, heard that Joshua had taken Ai and totally destroyed it, doing to Ai and its king as he had done to Jericho and its king, and that the people of Gibeon had made a treaty of peace with Israel and become their allies. He and his people were very much alarmed at this,
There.
Bless you.
because Gibeon was an important city, like one of the royal cities. It was larger than Ai, and all its men were good fighters. So Adonai-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, appealed to Hoham, king of Hebron, Piram, king of Jarmuth, Japhia, king of Lachish,
Lachish.
and
I'll
and
correct
Debir,
when you-
king of Eglon. Come up and help me attack Gibeon, he said. Gondor calls for aid. Because it has
Rohan
made
will
peace with-
answer.
because it has made peace with Joshua and with the Israelites. Then the 5 kings of the Amorites, the kings of Jerusalem, Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, and Eglon,
Lachish.
bless you,
More phlegm. More phlegm.
I relate.
they moved up with all their troops and took up positions against Gibeon and attacked it. The Gibeonites then sent word to Joshua to camp at Gilgal. Do not abandon your servants. Come up quickly and save us. This is the Gondor calls for aid thing. Help us, because all the Amorite kings from the hill country have joined forces against us. So Joshua marched up from Gilgal with his entire army, including all the best fighting men. The Lord said to Joshua, do not be afraid of them. I have given them into your hand. Not one of them will be able to withstand you. But a whole bunch together might. After an all-night march from Gilgal, Joshua took them by surprise. The Lord threw them into confusion before Israel, so Joshua and the Israelites defeated them completely at Gibeon. Israel pursued them along the road going to Beth Horon and cut them down all the way to Azekah and Madakah. As
Makeda.
they fled before Israel and the road down from Beth Horon to Azekah, the Lord hurled large hailstones down on them, and the more of them died from the hail than were killed by the swords of the Israelites. On the day the Lord gave the Amorites over to Israel, Joshua said to the Lord of the presence of Israel, Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and you, moon, over the valley of Ajalon. So the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, till the nation avenged itself on its enemies, as it is written in the book of Jasher. The sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day. There has never been a day like it before or since, a day when the Lord listened to a human being. Surely the Lord was fighting for Israel.
Okay, you can stop
and
here.
Joshua returned with all of
You can
Israel.
stop here.
What?
You can stop here. Is it?
Okay, then Joshua returned of all of Israel to the camp at Gilgal. And there was no mention made of all of these buildings and all these other foreign nations in China and everywhere else that suddenly fell over when the earth stopped rotating abruptly.
Yeah, so obviously this didn't actually happen, but the citation from the Book of Jasher is interesting, right? What this is probably a later addition to the actual text, because first of all, the story by itself is completely coherent without the whole sun standing still part. And then we get this quotation from this book, but the fact is, like, it's usually thought to be like, oh, it's just from the book of Jasher, but the thing is, some of this stuff also pops up in other parts of the Deuteronomistic history. So like this might have just been like source material that was that was used by a Deuteronomistic redactor to kind of tie loose ends together, right? Like you have multiple theological strings and they would be tied together that way.
And he at least had the decency to cite his source, so kudos to him. Although the idea that this didn't actually physically happen, Mark, do you remember that viral story that went around church, and I think is still going around church, much like the dropping flask didn't break thing, where, some scientists, some astrophysicists, unnamed, of some variety, were looking through their astronomical data and found that there was a day missing in time, and they had to figure out how it was this bit in Joshua, plus also the time where the sun went backwards for Hezekiah to convince a petty king that he wouldn't die of a fucking boil, and how it was, oh, well, it's the Bible had the answer the whole time.
Oh yeah, it's complete bull.
Oh, I know, but
Yeah.
that is a viral story that
Oh,
is
yeah,
still
people-
told by adult
I've
Christians
heard it.
who
Named Ray
have
Comfort.
graduated school
Mhm.
and are in the workforce that tell these stories to each other and believe them.
Yeah, I've heard that many times.
I've heard that story more than once. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, how much different would this be when compared to other myths that we've heard from, like, in the Greco-Roman traditions, like, forget which one, if it was like Julius Caesar or one of them, that when they were born, like, there was this comet all year long or whatever. Like, my point is, and
Oh,
I'm
Alexander the
butchering
Great.
there you go. But and then there are other stories that tie certain events along with some sort of cosmic event, like this one. Like, I think hail isn't that like meteors or something? Like all this crazy cosmic event, like surrounding or
But
ratifying some.
hailstorms could actually happen. There are meteor showers, and there are occasionally visible supernova, which would be dramatic. And definitely there are eclipses. There is never just the earth fucking stopping because, I
Yeah.
want to stab more.
Yeah, if
Yeah,
the Earth was to stop, then everything on the Earth would die instantly, pretty much,
Oh, yeah.
and
Yeah.
be destroyed.
They would
And
have
The
a lot of-
forces would destroy everything.
And I've also heard too that it could be perhaps like just like an analogy or symbolic of the fact that God just gave them a really long day to
Yeah,
battle.
that
I
is
have
the
a
point
I-
of
I
it.
have a I have an I mean I separated the comment on that miracle from the traditional and the modern, but I think Maimonides goes with that same line that they appear to the people as the longest day, something like that.
Yeah,
Well, the
Like
thing
it
the
being an
longest-
we have
illusion
to
is
remember-
probably the easiest.
Yeah.
like
So
a
if this
summer
is-
solstice kind of
Yeah,
a day.
yeah.
If this
That's
is a
how he said it.
citation of the Book of Jasher, what we're dealing with might have been some long epic poem that we don't have extant, but because it also contains like some was it some David and Jonathan stuff, or no, it was David and Saul maybe. This really speaks to more of an epic tradition, especially with the sun stopping thing. So it might be closer likened to something like the Iliad. So we're gonna have a lot more mythical takes. So the idea of the sun stopping completely, even though it was for just the day getting longer, just so they could have more time to kill, it's still it was still part of the story that it did stop.
Yeah, and
Because the
Dozeman notes-
Bible is not mythical at all.
No, not at all. Of course.
No, not like
It
any
is
of the other
interesting.
things that Yahweh did that contain entailments that would have destroyed the world.
It is
I should
interesting that the Bible quotes from a book that is not part of the Bible.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. Is the Book of Jasher, is that Old Testament or New Testament? I'm
It doesn't.
trying to find
We
it.
don't have anything.
Not
we don't-
neither. It's not extant.
Yeah, there is no.
But that's only
There
a
is- there is
problem if you're a
a-
Protestant.
There is like
So I've
is
got
there
I have
like
a question
pseudo
then. If
Jasher or
there is
something,
no,
there,
like a forgery sort of thing.
yeah, there is a midrash from like the first printed in the 16th century called the Sefer Yashar, but yeah, it's
Does it
Yeah, it's
claim
not-
to
it's
be
not
the
the
same
actual
book, or is
I
it like
think, or maybe I don't know. I think maybe the introduction claims the same book, but I can't
So
remember
if-
exactly.
if the Bible is the infallible, God-breathed word of God, and every word in it is 100% literally correct, then why is God referring to a book he didn't write or that he didn't bother to include that was apparently written by men. Why would God refer to works written by men and
Yeah.
then not include them in the Bible?
I mean, if you,
Mhm.
if you take that view, yeah, obviously you're gonna have a lot of issues. But historically, no, they had plenty of sources. In fact, the Deuteronomistic historian is kind of okay at citing sources. You know, once we get through all the kings stuff, we're going to see multiple citations of like the chronicles of the kings of Israel and Judah. He is taking this information from somewhere. So like that is
I mean,
definitely sorry, what?
I guess you could argue that he's claiming. I see. It's also written here, like his. Not this is where I got it from, but this is evidence
I
in
think
favor of
in
it.
fairness, we need to remember that Aaron lives in Texas and he advocates for, reality-based education, which means he comes up against the attitude of this is God breathed and every word is perfect and the Lord done spoken into the brain of Moses like a typewriter, and that's how it came down in the King James Version in 1612. Now, that is not...
Yeah, that's the one that God wrote. That's
exactly.
King
James. The Bible is not in there.
Just to remind myself.
But we have to be
Frickin'
fair
Geisler.
to Christianity as a whole. That is not the only attitude that people have had to the Bible in Christianity. That's not the only attitude even that Protestants have always. That has always been the constantly reinventing itself, frontline evangelical, love ignorance, hate knowledge group. There have always been that, people like to pretend that the modern group started in the 1920s. Truth be told, it like this level of deliberate idiocy about the Bible and worshiping it in the dumbest and most unintellectual way has always been a thing, but it has been far from the only way to take the Bible.
Yeah, Mike Winger gets himself in trouble with that kind of thing. He did a video a while ago saying that you can't just believe Jesus and ignore Paul or any of the rest of the New Testament because Jesus reaches out and grabs all the other texts and draws them in, and you're stuck with the whole Bible. But by the same token, the Bible itself reaches out and grabs other books that aren't in the Bible. So
also,
crap.
Paul was a creepy, narcissistic little bitch, and I don't take anything he says. So.
Oh yeah, that's completely.
Fuck Paul.
That guy sucks.
But remember, there could be many more miracles that we could show you that will lead you to believe that Jesus is the Son of God, according to John. They're just not. There's no need to write them down.
If he's the son of this God, then I feel sorry for him. Someone call CPS.
Yeah, I would compare this miracle to like the one in the Quran where God splits the moon in half.
I thought that was Muhammad that split the moon in half.
Whatever.
Yes, but
he rode the
power,
flying horse.
something.
Well, okay, we have to be careful. We have to be careful not to be anachronistic about it, though. Like we can't use like the same philosophy that we would use for the Quran there and apply it backwards to this part, to something that
I'm just saying it's
1,000 years earlier.
Yeah, I'm just saying it's similar in the sense that it's something that's impossible, and also you would expect people to have noticed.
Also, we're gonna read it. I'm gonna catch up on a couple.
That's the big part. Is no historical record of it.
Yeah.
China's just sitting there taking totally normal star charts.
Yeah, and people all over the world say, "What do you mean he split the moon in half?" It's there. I'm looking at it.
It came back together through the power of God.
It got better.
Little did you know, the moon we have today is actually half of it used to be the Mickey Mouse symbol.
Or maybe it was just maybe they just never noticed that sometimes the moon isn't full and sometimes it's a half, and they're like, "Whoa."
Yeah, because
M. Doug offers £5. It says Joshua 9 is all a bunch of gibberish.
Puns for days.
You should have said it as gibberish, but whatever.
And then Eric Wander says, what is known by scholars about the book of Jasher? Is there any new theory about what that book was? Is it mentioned in the Bible like 3 times, but not a lot of data about it?
Yeah, I mean, from what I mentioned before, sorry about the noise in the background. People don't understand the idea of streaming. So, all all that we know about it are these like lone citations, and I would say the newest hypothesis about it is the kind of epic cycle for it.
So
Okay.
yeah, I mean, not extant. We only have very small quotations from it. So I mean, it's not like we could piece it back together, which is why I still want Aaron's time machine. We could just go back and like watch.
And I should also note that regarding the quotation of the Book of Joshua, there's Dozeman notes that the boundaries of the poetic fragment are debated. Bowling and Wright begin the poem with the MT of verse 12b, and he said before the eyes of the Israel, in which case the subject is Yahweh rather than Joshua. But Holiday is likely correct that the poem begins in verse 12bb, sun at Gibeon stands still. S.L. Hall includes verse 13 AC as part of the poem. Is it not written in the Book of Jasher? M.K. Hom rightly concludes, however, that the phrase is not poetry, but a reference to the source that is being used by the author of Joshua 10. The original poem therefore likely ends at until he took vengeance on the nation of his enemy.
And just so we're clear, what they mean is the original poem of the citation, not of the original.
Yeah.
Right.
I think
the part being cited.
it's also worth mentioning too that there is mention of the Book of Jashar in the Talmud, identifying the book with the Book of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But
I think
apparently
Genesis,
that's
yeah.
a false identification.
Or
apparently.
Deuteronomy. Yeah.
Yeah,
I have
so
a
there is
comment
an
on.
opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is an
Yeah, I have
opinion
an.
that the Book of Asher is just the Book of Genesis.
Yeah. I have a comment on this as well.
Yeah, or the Book of the Just is how it's sometimes
Yeah,
translated.
Yashar. This is that's the name of the book, Hayashar, which means upright or straight. Which
It's
that
a little
led to-
confusing how God loses track of his own literature.
Which would have been really weird to like. You could call it that, but the thing is, when they do talk about it, or like from my memory, when they talk about anything in the Torah or in Deuteronomy, they usually cite those things. You usually say like, oh, it's from the books of Moses or something like that. Like it's I don't know how often they would cite the Book of the Just in Talmudic literature. Like, so if this was a common thing, then maybe, but if this was kind of one lone reference, I would think that it would be kind of unlikely to just cite it as a different name.
Yeah.
They didn't have it. They didn't
No, they
have.
wouldn't have
They
had
didn't know what it
Genesis.
was. They were debating what it was, and so there
In
was
the
an opinion in the
Deuteronomistic
Talmud.
times.
Yeah.
They would not have had Genesis, although Genesis could have used Jasher if it still existed as a source. But yeah, it's
Got a couple more comments to read. Eric86 says, why would God need an army and smiting? Why not just do a Thanos snap?
because then he doesn't get to crush his enemies, see them driven before him, and hear the lamentations of the women.
Yes, exactly. And then Say10-616 says, when I was a Christian, I didn't understand why God would not only allow his people to murder, but also assist them in killing. Wasn't God, who is also Jesus, a pacifist? No, Jesus, no.
No,
Oh,
no.
Christ, no.
That's funny, but no. This is a very funny person.
Oh yeah, no, Jesus, some of Jesus's sayings, if taken on their own without some of the other sayings, can be taken as a justification for pacifism, and both Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. used them in that way, because good people can draw good things out of that pile of crazy fuckery. However, if you take the book as a whole, no. I mean, even Christ said, I did not come to bring peace on earth, but a sword. For I came to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's enemies will be the members of his own household. Or the bit about, but now whoever has, does not have a sword must sell his mantle and buy one. So you've got that versus he who lives by the sword dies by the sword. It's all contradictions. If you pick the right bits, you can come up with something good.
Yeah, essentially, which is kind of the issue that Marcion had. A lot of people feel, while intrinsically, I have this love for Marcion and his distinction between in the evil god and the good god, and saying that there are two gods, right?
Mm.
Quite funny. The thing is, yeah, it is cherry picking verses.
But in fairness, so do the evil people. The evil people also have to cherry pick verses. It's just
Well,
there's
yeah,
no
absolutely, yeah.
continuity. Though trying to pretend there's no contradiction does shut down your brain in a way that lets you do anything, and it's very terrifying.
Tomer, did you finish your commentary?
I haven't started it. Yeah, and it's a bit long, especially on verse 12 and 13. Yeah, 13. Yeah, but especially on 12 because I had to separate traditional thinking and modern thinking. So
Tomer, before you
I'd
start,
like to see those contrasted.
I did want to say something to Arn, because Arn, you have been on your show several times saying that the moon was never split in half because no one noticed it. But can you explain to me that if no one noticed, how come this American tradition where people show each other a body part that is split in half and call it mooning?
Grow up.
Sorry.
Give me your
Yeah.
girlfriend's phone number. I'm going to send them a message to hit you with something.
They don't have a phone.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, the evidence is in the crack, if I'm understanding Peter correctly.
Shut up.
It's shitty evidence.
Oh,
No.
I like that.
Okay, moving on.
Yeah.
I thought
Okay,
I'd crack a joke.
I'll begin.
Come on, hey, come on, Peter, don't be such a tuchus.
you bum.
And now for something completely different.
Okay,
Tomer.
there is no God, and I'm going to start drinking more. I'll
Oh,
be
I
back.
thought Isaac you would say a man with 3 buttocks, but yeah, I know. Okay, on verse 1, Adonit Tzedek. The meaning of the name is "My Lord is Justice" or "My Lord is Zedek," with Zakovitch noting that Zedek is the name of a Phoenician deity. According to Genesis Rabbah 43, Zedek is the name of Jerusalem. We learn about the king Malchizedek in Genesis 14 verses 18 to 20. Kimchi and Gersonides wrote that the kings of Jerusalem were called either Malchizedek or Adonitzedek, just as the kings of Egypt were all called Pharaoh. Septuagint has Adoni Bezek, my lord is Bezek. This name is found in Judges 1 verses 5 to 7. Butler and Dozeman prefer to read Adonitzedek as the original. On that same verse, Jerusalem, in Hebrew, Yerushalayim. This is the first verse which mentions Jerusalem by that name. Ahituv writes that the biblical name Yerushalayim is reflecting the earlier version Yerushalem, found in the El Amana letters and Septuagint. Dozeman writes that the name is likely a combination of Yeru, to establish, and Shalem, the name of the patron deity of the city Salem, and thus founded by / of Salem. The city is mentioned in Genesis 14, verses 17 to 24, and is ruled by Malchizedek, which illustrates that the city is remembered in tradition as being non-Israelite in origin. This tradition continues in Judges 1:21, 2 Samuel 5, and 1 Chronicles 11. He further writes, the prominence of Jerusalem as a religious center for Judah originated during the monarchic period, when it became the location of the central temple and the ark, seen in 1 Kings 8:1 and 1 Chronicles 11:4. Thus, Jerusalem was designated as the royal city of God in Psalms 48. Its destruction by the Neo-Babylonians signals a religious crisis in Psalms 137. Yet the city continues to be significant in Second Temple Judaism. The rebuilding of the temple in Ezra 3 and the city walls in Nehemiah chapters 3, 4, and 12 in the post-exilic period are the central tasks of the returnees of Yehud, and these activities occupy a prominent role in the post-exilic literature such as Haggai, Zechariah, 2nd and 3rd Isaiah. On verse 2, he and his people were very much alarmed. The Hebrew Bible reads Vayireu, which means and they feared. Butler notes that many translators see this as either a collective or a collective singular, or as an error, since in verse 1 the king is the subject. Vogt has he was exceedingly afraid. Nelson writes that there is an ironic reversal. The apparent folly of Israel's alliance with Gibeon has turned out to be a strategic advantage and an opportunity for a decisive Israelite victory. On that same verse, it was larger than I. This is absent from the Septuagint. Modern commentators take it as an expansion by MT, with Butler writing that this addition enhances the ensuing achievement and makes the tie to the larger tradition explicit. On verse 3, Nelson comments, the names of the cities reappear in the same order in 12:10 to 12, but the direction of literary dependence is unclear. It is likely, though, that chapter 12 served as the source for these towns, which would make them the redactional contribution of DH. The earlier designation for the coalition would have been the 5 kings of the Amorites, as seen in verse 5 and compare 5:1. These same city names recur in verses 5 and 23, first to underscore the threat, then to emphasize how totally the threat was annihilated. The number 5 may also be a folkloristic touch, as seen in 13:21, Genesis 14:2, 47:2, and 1 Samuel 17:40. Since Debil is elsewhere the name of a city, what looks like its conversion into a personal name may indicate a mistransmission of the tradition or the author's creative invention of names to add color to the narrative. The peculiar names Hoham and Piram may represent the same process. On verse 10, the Lord threw them into confusion. The Hebrew Bible reads, Vayehumem Yehovah. The word Yehumem is derived from the root Hey Mem Mem, to make a noise or confuse, as in Peshitta, Kara, BDB, and Ahituv. The root is used when God intervenes in battle, as seen in the Red Sea crossing, Exodus 14:24-25, Deborah's war in Judges 4:15, and Saul's war against the Philistines, 1 Samuel 7:10. Butler notes that the term is closely tied to storm phenomena. Nelson writes that panic is Yahweh's characteristic weapon, resulting in a mighty blow, seen in verse 20 and Judges 11:33 and 1 Samuel 19:8. The Vulgate has troubled them, and Targum shattered them. On verse 11, the Lord hurled large hailstones down on them. The Hebrew Bible and most other translations read large stones, Hebrew avanim gdolot, but Septuagint has hail. Achituv wrote that this refers to the hailstones mentioned later in the verse. Dozeman notes that some commentators think that hailstones is a secondary addition by MT. He notes, however, Younger's observation that hailstones are a common motif in ancient Near Eastern conquest accounts, such as the heavenly stones by which the god Adad destroys the enemies of Sargon II. Likewise, hailstones signify the power of Yahweh as the storm god in the Bible, Job 38:22, Psalms 18:30-18, and Isaiah 28:2. Butler notes that some suggested an original stones in both instances, being modified by both MT and Septuagint.
Could this narrative or this myth or whatever be taken as evidence that perhaps these people did see, that whole canopy hypotheses that God is above and it's a solid structure and that's where he gets the stones from? Like, is that sort of like where this may be coming from, perhaps? Like, where
Like
is he
he
getting
opens
the
one of the
hailstones
windows
from?
in the heavens to throw rocks at people.
Yeah,
Where
kind
is
of
he
like
getting
Sodom and
them? He's
Gomorrah
God.
as well.
He can make stones that he can't make.
Right.
Yeah, I mean there is a. I mean when they use the word like barad for hailstones, I think that does that always imply what we think of as hailstones, like just ice, or is it stones like what you might think a meteorite might be? I
I
feel like that's
mean,
a lot more.
to my knowledge, it would be like, the same way we think about hail.
Yeah, I mean,
Hail
you
is
have
more
the,
likely to have hit you and caused damage
yeah,
in
I mean,
reality.
you have the hailstorm in the Egyptian plague, right? I assume that's
Yeah,
the
yeah,
same thing.
yeah, and then they have to be like,
Why
oh,
they call it
hail.
hail?
It's not.
Because hail God or something.
Of course.
That's
Yeah,
Hail.
but then you have like traditional
Oh, come on.
commentators always going on about how the hail in Egypt was like this miraculous, ice and fire
Fire and
mixture kind of thing.
yeah,
Yes. Well, fall from a clear sky and burn as fire upon the ground, and you will know that it is the Lord who has done these things.
Yeah. Now we're getting to the 12. The sun stands still over Gibeon, and you moon over the valley of Ayalon. So we'll start off with the traditional interpretations. Chazal understood the miracle plainly, that the sun did stand still. Talmud Avodah Zarah 25a records a debate between some rabbis regarding how long the sun stood still. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi claimed that it stood for 12 hours, 6 hours at midnight and 6 hours at sundown. Rabbi Elazar claimed that it stood for 36 hours, 12 hours at midnight, 24 hours, 12 hours at midnight and 12 hours at sundown. And Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani said that it stood for 48 hours, 12 hours at midnight. It's 36. I don't know why I wrote 48. It's for 36 hours, 12 hours at midnight, and 24 hours at sundown. According to Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer 52, the sun and the rest of the stars stood for 36 hours to prevent the warriors from desecrating the Sabbath.
Oh.
That's funny. That's very funny.
Oh,
So-
God.
Because
This
it's still
plain reading,
technically the same day. But
Yeah,
how
I
did
mean,
it
Yeah,
I
tell?
mean,
The
How could
Sabbath
they have
starts
told?
at sunset. So, as long as the sun doesn't set, you can keep killing people and it's okay.
I mean,
so
the geocentric view would have been, I guess everyone would have held like, oh, this
Right.
is fine. This is not so complicated until, Copernicus, I think. So
Well,
makes sense that all of the traditional
yeah.
ones would have seen this as not problematic.
mhm.
Well,
So-
Ptolemy and Hypatia did a lot of work to try to shore up the geocentric model. Prior to them, there were a lot of people who were mockers and scoffers. And even so, their model still only held in the, let's say, the Christianized world.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, they had to come up with 13 volumes of calculations to, explain. They did find a way to predict the motion of the planets involving, retrograde motion around a central point for no reason.
Mhm.
And being so early in tackling the problem, we can perhaps forgive them for not knowing that geocentrism is bollocks. But we know better now, or we should. Not
Well,
all
we
of us-
can't because
Yeah.
the Bible says that the earth was the first thing at the beginning and the center of the universe.
Yeah, the Bible also says that love is not jealous and that God is love, and also that the Lord your God is a jealous God. So fuck it.
Yeah.
Mhm. Who
Well,
needs
let's not
logic?
forget that all the sun, moon, and the stars, because the stars are something separate from the sun, are all within the firmament. So
Mhm.
the
Well,
whole universe, we are the universe, this world.
We
Well-
are the world.
We are children.
So this plain reading has been accepted by Rashi, Kimchi, Kara, and Abravanel. Some of them took the word dom, stand still, to mean be silent, and thus Joshua silenced the sun from reciting its song, as it was believed that the celestial bodies are living beings who can hear and speak.
Sure, sunrises
Well,
can be pretty loud.
that is that is accurate because a lot of things, not just like the sun and the stars, but even like the trees and stuff, they were also said to like sing the praises of God.
The
Yeah,
trepidation
the
I- I
rocks
of
and
think
the
stones
trees circled the
themselves
stars.
will start to sing. The Quran says something
Yeah,
similar.
I think the sun
Both
and
the Bible
the
and the Quran.
the planets were
the-
seen almost like angels.
Mm.
Sorry.
Yeah,
You were
the
saying,
Bible
Aaron?
and the Quran both say that in their different ways that rocks are Christian or that rocks are Muslim.
If they were to hold back, the very stones would cry out. Yeah. It's the idea that nature, not necessarily every individual bit of nature having its own consciousness, but that nature is somehow aware that it is beholden to God and will therefore react to his words. Yeah.
Look at the trees.
Look at the trees, exactly. But the trees would then, which is why you can command a mountain to fall into the sea if you have enough faith and are appropriately blessed, because of course the commandments, the spoken word of those who are sufficiently faithful will of course have power over nature, which is why so many mountains have been thrown into the sea by Christians.
I wonder, do you have to unscrew the pegs that the mountains are in first?
Only if you're a Muslim.
But if I contest where the Bible says that the rocks and stones themselves will start to sing, or if I contest where the Quran talks about how rocks are Muslim and will assist Muslims in hunting down Jews who are trying to hide behind those rocks, if I contest that and say that no, rocks do not have a religious belief and therefore are in the adjective atheist, they are without a God belief, well, then everybody comes down on me. And it's a huge thing on Twitter for days.
Well,
I remember that.
you think you descended from a rock and that your grandmother was a strawberry.
Right, yes. That is. Listen, if I learned anything from Ken Oved, it's that.
Yeah, because it's not like he believes that his ancestors were formed of mud and had to marry their sisters. So you didn't come from no monkey, you came from dirt and incest, and dirt is in no way rocks. That's not totally the same thing.
Well, I believe in the beginning God, and you believe in the beginning dirt.
What's the thing that Howin always says, like non-dogs never come from dogs or something like that?
Yeah, a dog never gave birth to a non-dog. Never mind that wolves gave rise to dogs. No, we're looking forward, not backward.
It's the tyranny of the discontinuous mind.
Which is something that even Hovind, I've heard him say. I think it was actually in a debate with Aaron. That they might have, he was fine accepting wolf to dog, but he just can't. This
is another. I don't know if how much this is a Jewish idea, but it's definitely a Christian idea that creation is perfect. So they imagine the genomes of these ancient cats being these massive things, and then pruning away into their various lines because nothing new can be added, because that would be an increase in perfection, because this idea of God creating perfection, and we have degenerated it with our sinful, icky, fleshy sinfulness. We're so bad, and
all according to plan.
The only way to go is down. At least with the Hindus, it picks back up after the crash, but not with us. No, it's just all our fault, and we're dirty and bad. As opposed to adapting. Also, everything has to be hierarchical, so everything is better or worse than something else. There's no such thing as just variation that works better in this situation and worse in that. Reality.
Yeah, so I'm resuming from verse 16.
No, I'm still stuck at that verse. I mean, you've all started talking about Hovind or something. I don't know why. Okay.
For the lulz.
Thank you, Peter. Some Christian commentators, such as Ambrose and Augustine, accepted the literal reading. On the other hand, there are some who did not take the miracle literally. Gersonides, for example, rejected the literal reading for the following reasons. 1, this miracle was greater than all of Moses' miracles, which contradicts what is said in Deuteronomy 34, verses 10 to 12, that there never rose a prophet like Moses who gave miracles like he did. 2, in verse 13, the sun, quote, delayed going down, in Hebrew, lo atzlavo, meaning that the sun moved slowly. And 3, according to verse 14, the main miracle was regarding the war, not the sun. He concludes that the miracle was the Israelites winning before the sun went down and before the moon rose. Maimonides, in Guide 235, wrote that the day appeared to the people at Gibeon as their longest day in the summer. And Origen, he wrote that the staying of the sun's course is a figure for Christ's extension of the time for salvation to allow for the ingathering of the nations.
Cope so hard.
So hard. The copium is real.
They should go to a hospital. They are overdosing on copium.
They are. This is what I say to Christians who are still like, Jesus is coming back any minute. I'm like, guys, it's been 2,000 years. You have been ghosted. He's just not that into you. Let it go.
And now for the modern reading. Nelson writes that there have been three approaches to discovering what the poem signified in its original context. One, a natural phenomenon misinterpreted miraculously. Two, an astrological oracle understood incorrectly. And three, a mythic statement taken literally. For the first approach, he writes that some understood the verb damam, to stand still, to mean remain dark or do not shine, and the verb amad, stand still, in verse 13 to have the same meaning, based on Habakkuk 3:11. Thus, some have taken it either that the sun and moon turned dark, or that the sun did not rise and the moon stayed in place, so that pre-dawn darkness might be preserved for the early morning attack in verse 9. He suggested that the original speaker wasn't Joshua or God, but rather the poet who is apostrophizing or addressing the heavenly bodies. Since this fragment is part of a poem, the verb damam would indicate a stunned reaction in the face of a startling catastrophe or astonishing revelation, Exodus 15:16, and amad should be understood on the basis of Habakkuk 3:11, where the moon stands still in the face of the manifestations of Yahweh's theophany. He writes, envisioning the Joshua fragment in such a poetic context, one realizes that originally these two heavenly entities were being called upon to stand frozen or fixed, or perhaps silent, in stunned reaction to an awe inspiring victory. The poem is making a dramatic appeal to the heavenly luminaries to react to Israel's astonishing triumph with astonished immobility, verse 12b, and then goes on to repeat that they indeed stood froze in shock and amazement until a nation took revenge on its enemies. And Dozeman writes, if the speaker is a human, the poem is an incantation or an omen directed to the sun as a cosmic power in its own right. This is the interpretation of Jan Dus, who understands the sun to be a cultic deity. Blenkinsop extends the interpretation to emphasize the motif of war, in which case the incantation may be aimed at preventing the sun from participating in a battle. J.G. Taylor moves in a different direction, concluding that Yahweh and the sun are equated in the poem, so that the sun at Gibeon reflects a Yahwistic cult of the sun, in which Yahweh is called upon to help in war. The poem may also be an omen, especially if the reference to sun and moon is not simply a poetic word pair with a focus on the sun, but is directed equally to the sun at Gibeon in the east and to the moon at the valley of Ayalon in the west. When read in this way, the poem may reflect ancient astrology, with the author seeking an omen of good fortune from the sun and moon before waging war.
So if I can ask, just to make sure, where it says, sun, stand still at Gibeon, where it says sun there, that is, I don't know if Hebrew has it. Is this in the vocative? So like you're speaking to the sun, right?
Yeah, Shemesh begivon dom,
Okay.
sun in Gibeon standstill. Yeah.
Okay. So I get kind of the where the conclusion comes from on the identification of God with the sun, because if he's speaking to God and he says sun, that would be kind of strange, right? But this is where I would think like verses 12 through 14, maybe 12 through 15, no, 12 through 14 probably, are just a later addition that take the quotation. And honestly, I'm not sure if the redactor would have just fucked up there, or if they did have this kind of idea where in lieu of changing religious dynamics, they could have been identifiable, but maybe God would have been identifiable with all of nature. But either way, like when it says beforehand that the or was it? Yeah, there were more who died because of the hailstones than the Israelites killed with the sword. Obviously, that's the far bigger issue, at least for the people there, right? But when by the end of this oracle, if you want to call it that, by the end of it, it seems like the people are uh, like the people of Israel are shown to be like the biggest problem, right? Uh, especially once we get to the next few verses where the kings are all fleeing. It does seem like to me that this is just a later edition taking from a different source.
Taking it in kind of a poetic, epic sense, because obviously, natural, as we've discussed in detail, natural phenomenon, the sun, even if you don't think it's a deity, you would think it capable at least of responding to deity. You could see some great epic poet going, "Oh, sun, stand still and behold this great and dramatic thing that a god is doing. It's terribly impressive, isn't it?" So, that, obviously not a literal thing that happens, but you can definitely
What
see
light
that
through
being
yonder
infighting.
window breaks? It is
Yes,
the dawn.
'tis the east and Juliet is the dawn. Yes, but that's the kind of thing. Oh, nature, bear witness to this great, tremendous thing that happened where a bunch of petty warlords killed a bunch of other petty warlords. It's very dramatic. But yeah, it's kind of interesting to trace the history of thought, how that went from a dramatic saying by a poet to people actually trying to pretend that there's a day missing in the universe because we're so special.
And oh,
So you're finished?
no, just waiting for it. I see comments. You want to read them first?
Okay. I don't have these comments up here.
They're here.
Oh, wait, here they are. Yep, got it. So Matt White says, Tomer, are we saying God's chief weapon is fear? Fear and surprise?
Is that a reference to something?
I'm sure it is.
Probably something you were saying in the commentary before.
It's Monty.
Yeah.
It's Monty Python.
Fear and surprise. Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition.
Okay. I forgot about that.
Our secret weapons are fear, surprise. Three.
Okay.
And a nomus fanatical are three are amongst our weapons. Our fear, surprise.
Stop.
Let's do it again.
Shut up, dog.
See what you did?
Yeah. So Eric Wander says, there has never been a day like it before or since, a day when the Lord listened to a human being. Yeah. Didn't Moses convince God not to kill everybody in Exodus 32?
Well, that was he. Okay,
aren't people still praying today?
His idea.
No, but the issue with Exodus 32, right? That's where only people chose factions, and then God killed the ones that chose the wrong faction, or he had one faction kill the other faction. So,
but he wanted to wipe out everybody, and Moses said, Yahweh, home slice. That's not a great idea. What will the Egyptian gods think?
Exactly. It'll make you look bad
So God
if you
was
kill
like-
all your people. Only kill some of them, for discipline.
Yeah. So God didn't listen to Moses. It was his idea all along.
Well, Dozeman notes that Yahweh listens to the voice of the Israelites in the war against Arad in Numbers 21:3, for example, and to the request of Elijah to revive the son of the widow at Zarephath in 1 Kings 17:22.
Yeah, so there, and of course, if we go back to Genesis and Abraham kind of like negotiating with God about the people of Sodom, right?
What if there's only 10 good people?
Yeah.
Well, what if there's only 5 good people?
Yeah.
God never listens, though. Never has there been a day.
Well,
it's one thing if you ask nicely. It's different
if you said that nature listened to a man speaking on behalf of God or speaking for God or to God, but that you have a sort of a prefiguring of Jesus with the whole commanding the waters to be still. He's like a non-useless Aquaman.
Also, if you remember I can't say you remember if you haven't gotten to it yet, but in the Elisha cycle, it's very much like they have received. Well, Elijah first receives this spirit of God, right? So it's the ability to prophesy and speak for God in general. So just acting as a mouthpiece, it wouldn't even be seen as just another human being.
Right. Yeah. But he's received the power from his patron deity, as a warlock. So he can, to a certain degree, do what he wants with it. I'm sorry. D&D is the best explanation for the Bible stuff. Yes.
Jesus
more
Christ, that was Mikhail's D&D character.
One more comment. Trevor and Wright says, is it true that Yahweh is viewed as an invading force that is always in competition with other gods to maintain his influence in Canaan?
Yes.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll continue on
This
verse
was
13.
true, too. He was not part of the original Canaanite pantheon, though he did sort of eat some of the other gods.
Essentially, yeah. Ate them is a good word.
There can be only one.
Engulfed them.
Yes.
He was grafted in, not part of it.
Yeah, but he like consumed the others so that there are like heads growing off his body. It's really gross.
Okay, verse 13, the book of Jasher. In Hebrew, Sefer HaYashar, the book of the upright or the straight. This book is mentioned again in David's lament in 2 Samuel 1:18. This led some to think that this book was a book of poems, such as in the Septuagint on 1 Kings 8:12. The Peshitta renders book of praises, reading Sefer Hashir. Rabbi Chia Bar Abba in Talmud Avodah Zarah 25a identified it as the book of Genesis, since the patriarchs are called upright in Numbers 23:10. This identification was accepted by Rashi, Kinchi, and Kara. Gersonides, however, wrote that this is a lost work. And I've also noted that there is a Midrash Sutta on Song of Songs that said that at the same hour, he, i.e. Elijah in the later days, pulled out the book of the upright because the Torah is just a single sentence from it or something like that. So another to consider. So the sentence, as is written in the book of Jasher, is absent from the Septuagint. This led some commentators, like Nelson and Auld, to conclude that the MT represents an expansion. Butler notes the opinions of Younger, who thought that the work is pre-monarchic, of Howard, who suggested that no actual quotation from the book of Jasher is given, and of de Troyer, who wrote that the quotation is old, but the title of the book was not well known. He further writes, the name and the content of the book are not the most important issue. What is noteworthy is that the Hebrew tradition understood that its scripture was based on even more ancient sources. This implies the removal of the final authors of scripture from eyewitnesses to compilers of early traditions and sources, just as critical scholarship has shown on other grounds. The criteria for authority and canonicity in the Old Testament is not that of having been an eyewitness of the events. Rather, it is that of having been inspired by God to use traditions of the nation to interpret the identity of the nation for the future. The book of Joshua is based on old traditions and sources, but its ultimate form was achieved only by later editors or compilers, perhaps even into the exilic period.
So what you're saying is that the book of Jasher might actually have been written by Jasher, but
No,
whoever was compiling the Bible
It's
wanted
not
to
a
make sure
name.
that everything
that's
was
not a
written
name,
by
Ari.
ghostwriters. What?
Jasher is not a name.
Okay, well, you missed the joke, but I'll go, okay, go ahead.
Oh,
No, he wasn't being literal. He means that, like, the original sources were totally eyewitness. It's like a pastor said to me when I was explaining why I was questioning scripture. And he said, we don't have to believe that the Bible is inerrant. We have to believe that the Bible is inerrant in its original form, and we don't have that. And I'm like, bitch, did you just say we are obligated by theology to believe X, and because X is demonstrably false, we instead will believe X to the power of N? Like, the fuck is this? I am obligated to believe my ass.
It's not just believe things you have no reason to believe. It's believe things that you know are false and believe them anyway. That's a much bigger ask.
And if you can't believe the thing that is obviously and demonstrably false, you can believe a thing that is baseless and impossible to verify that gets you around the obvious falseness so that you're not wrong.
I often quote
even if you're not right.
I often quote two contemporary philosophers from the 19th century, both with great big mustaches. One of whom, Friedrich Nietzsche, who said that faith is not wanting to know what is true. And the other is a pen named Mark Twain, who wrote in one of his books that faith is believing what you know ain't so. And I think both of these men got it right.
Absolutely.
Something else that should also make us suspicious when reading things like this, and this I've heard, I think, from Barterman and other historians that will mention that whenever ancient historians would include a quote or some source, and it involves some sort of like fantastical claim or something like that, it generally would be prefaced by some sort of mention like, hey, by the way, this is from so and so, take it as, it may or may not be true, but perhaps, this would have been the case. In other words, they're going to cushion citations about, phenomena like this and preface it with like a warning. Whereas in scripture, you don't see that. It just says, this is what happened according to so and so, and that's it. You're supposed to just believe it.
And weirdly, that actually works against scholars sometimes. I've heard innumerable apologists say, oh, well, the scholars, they're not sure of anything. They have to throw in all these qualifiers and perhapses and maybes, whereas Scripture just comes right out and says, this happened. So, of the two, who has more confidence and therefore should be more believable?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is the kind of thing I hate. So many people who are not like experts in the field or even attempting to understand the field are assuming that just because they are confident in something that they are in fact right. Like
It's
if
so
someone
stupid.
doesn't actually know what they're talking about, they will be more confident. I mean, it's the whole Dunning-Kruger thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous.
I always
there are
point
people-
out to these people. I always point out to these people, and it's a very important thing, that 100% certainty is not how grown-ups think. There are two people who will offer you 100% certainty about what they say: children and con men. Those are your only two options. So
And
you're
Seth-
either a mental infant or you're a lying fraud. Take your pick.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've got into an argument over the issue of certainty recently. Was saying, well, you can't prove this. I'm like, well, yeah, actually, in this case, I can, because we're talking about something logical, right? So if we don't have souls, then obviously we can't have an afterlife for our souls to go to. That was the statement I was saying. So if you don't have a soul, then you can't have an afterlife, right? Understand? But the guy doesn't understand what a logical syllogism is anyway, or anything in logic of that conversation.
Well, logic is antithetical to blind belief. So
I remember what else I was going to go on about. You guys were talking before about conviction, right? That these people believe that because they believe they know. I think that's what I put as my fourth foundational falsehood of creationism, that believing something means you know it. And they've actually had people cite for me recently, like, because all these arguments that I get into on social media, where these people tell me that the fact that they believe something is evidence that it is true.
I can say from personal life experience that no degree of inner certainty has the slightest effect on whether or not something is true. And if you have to rely on it, it's probably not true.
And then Pandora's Pinata, that's one of my favorite names too. It said, did someone say Blasphemers AD&D?
Speaking of, so I have been working on it's not even like that's not even my own campaign, but like I'm making my own tabletop, more biblically accurate D&D type of thing. So like I can't call it D&D because of legal issues, right? But it is like a tabletop Bible themed role playing game, and it's going to be more historically accurate, meaning there will be other gods. And you know how like you have like strength, charisma, stuff like that, and dex, whatever, all of them are. I included another one, which is your divinity score. And the higher up your divinity score is, the closer you are to like being an angel, or like you have like, you go from human to prophet to angel to, and like only God can have like 100 in that score. But yeah, I'm kind of designing like a system for that, because I think it'd be a lot of fun to have a more biblically accurate one.
Can I become a vengeful paladin sworn to the service of God's ex-wife?
You can be a priestess to Asherah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there will be smiting involved. Yes.
If you have a high enough divinity score.
I will be smiting.
Okay, I'll continue. Oh.
Okay.
On verse 14, Dozeman notes that the miracle associated with the poem is no longer the sun ceasing its motion, but that Yahweh obeyed the voice of Joshua. The sun and moon provide little more than the background to illustrate Joshua's favorite status with Yahweh. Nelson writes that this is an act of demythologizing the role of the sun, of making orthodox a problematic bit of tradition. And Butler writes, the narrator's summation of the event magnifies Joshua's heroism and prestige, imbuing him with a unique eminence previously reserved for only Moses. This cannot mean that God has never answered a prayer. It probably means that God has never taken orders from anyone in battle. Sarah L. Hall compares this passage with others where God has listened to a human and concludes that unlike other instances, here Joshua's petition is both public and a request for something specifically miraculous. That's it for my comment on this part.
I did want to mention something. You mentioned.
Yay. Too bad there's more verses, right?
Yeah.
All right. So I'm.
Thomas, you said earlier
Wait.
about the. Yeah, you said earlier about like the traditional idea of like the rather than them moving or whatever, it was like them becoming silent because they were like angels and singing praises.
Yeah.
I think as an extension to that, I think that there is this idea that in order for the celestial bodies or whatever to actually do their job, they are in essence singing. So the sun moving through the sky, providing light, is it singing to God. And so by becoming quiet, it stopped moving. Yeah.
You know,
And-
some
and-
Christians
and-
are going to
and-
argue
yeah.
that's early string theory.
That sounds very Ecclesiastes.
Mm.
Yeah,
The
I think
music of
it's
the
later. Yeah.
Yeah, that's Rashi. He said that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and I think even does Rashi also say like Joshua said this song to replace
Yeah.
with the sun's role in praising God. So he was like praising. Here I'm gonna saying to God, praising God instead of the sun, and my song is about me replacing him, and the sun will stand still or something like that.
No, I don't think he said that.
No, okay.
It's an interesting
no.
mythology.
We ready to continue?
Yes, read up
All right.
to 28, I think, or 27.
Okay.
27.
Okay. Starting from 16. Now the 5 kings had fled and hidden in the cave at Madakah. When Joshua
Makeda.
was told that the what?
Makeda, not Madeka. Makeda.
You say tomato. When Joshua was told that the 5 kings had been found hiding in the cave at Madakah, he said,
Oh my
Madaka,
God.
Makeda,
Makata.
Yeah.
Makeda, whatever.
Hakuna Makata.
Let's call the whole thing off.
He said, roll large rocks up to the mouth of the cave and post some men there to guard it. But don't stop. Pursue your enemies. Attack them from the rear and don't let them reach their cities, for the Lord your God has given them into your hand. Which kind of tells me if God had given them to me, then why would I have to attack them at all? But anyway.
How were they able to run?
So Joshua and the Israelites defeated them completely. But a few survivors managed to reach their fortified cities, so they didn't defeat them completely. I'm sorry. The whole army then returned safely to Joshua at the camp of Makkedah.
Thank you.
And no one uttered a word against the Israelites. Joshua said, open the mouth of the cave and bring those 5 kings out to me. So they brought the 5 kings out of the cave. The king of Jerusalem, Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, and Eglon. When they brought these kings out to Joshua, he summoned all the men of Israel and said to the army of commanders who had come with them, come here, put your head on the necks of these kings. Put your feet on the necks of these kings. So they came forward and placed their feet on their necks. Joshua said to them, "Do not be afraid, do not be discouraged, be strong and courageous. This is what the Lord will do to all the enemies you are going to fight." Then Joshua put the kings to death and exposed their bodies on 5 poles, and they were left hanging on the poles until evening. At sunset, Joshua gave the order, and they took them down from the poles, and they threw them into the cave where they had been hiding. At the mouth of the cave, they placed large rocks, which are there to this day.
Behold, they're still there to this day.
Yeah, classic.
Dun, dun, dun.
Isn't there a thing about not putting people on poles somewhere that seems to tickle my brain somehow?
Well, not putting them up on trees, right? That was a huge sign of like.
Well, if you do, they are cursed.
Right. Yeah. So that's
So
why.
it's okay because they're cursing.
Yeah, they're the enemies. That's fine.
Yeah.
Although I did want to note here, so right before they hang them, they put their feet on their necks, right? Like that is a very Near Eastern artistic motif. Like you will often see kings stepping on their enemies, and that is the sign of the enemy's destruction. So when he says, for thus the Lord will do to all the enemies against whom you fight, that's probably not about the hanging. It's about the feet on their necks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
God has a degradation kink. Who knew?
Complete dominion and subjugation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interestingly, though, that's how the Egyptian pharaohs are often depicted.
Yep, that too.
With regards to their enemies. Not so much in Mesopotamian depictions where it was more like the gods doing that.
The gods would do it often, yeah.
Yeah. True. So it's interesting that they bring that about.
I think it was it was on the King Narmer palette, right? That the king would have been standing on them, and then in Mesopotamia, I forget the god, but he's like I can visualize the actual inscription. Like it's this long inscription, very, very phallic shaped, and he's kind of like going up this mountain, and he's like stepping on his enemies. I forget who it was for. I'll have to look it up.
And isn't the whole concept of the footstool similar or connected to this?
Well, the footstool, I think, is more of like the a place of rest kind of thing.
For the god, yeah.
Yeah, so like maybe related.
Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool under your feet.
That's what I mean.
Lord said to my Lord. Yeah, the quotation from
right. So it would bring you rest, their destruction.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll start my commentary. Verse 15. This verse does not appear in the Septuagint. Nelson and Butler write that this verse, as well as verse 43, are MT expansions to reinforce the connection to Gilgal. Compare verse 21. Ahituv suggested that verse 15 should precede verse 43, and Zakovitch proposed a scribal error. On verse 20, a few survivors managed to reach their fortified cities. Zakovitch notes that this contradicts what was said previously in the verse. Moreover, the sentence breaks the continuity between the previous clause and verse 21. He writes that these words are an exegetical addition to reconcile between the description of the battle and the next part of the chapter, verses 28 to 40, where the Israelites arrive to some of the defeated royal cities and fight against them. Nelson writes that this parenthetic qualification, quote-unquote, serves also to enhance dramatic tension. On verse 21, the whole army then returned safely to Joshua in the camp of Makkedah. This clause seems strange, since in verse 20, Joshua fights with the Israelites. Kimchi writes that at first, when the war was over, they returned to Gilgal, and when they told Joshua that the kings hide in a cave at Makkedah, he came to Makkedah with some of the army. Ahituv writes that the general picture is of the warriors spreading out to chase after those who ran away, each man to his city, and little by little, the different squads returned to the camp at Makedah, where a single unit guards the cave. The Septuagint lacks in the camp. Dozeman writes that MT appears to emphasize the camp of Joshua as opposed to the royal cities of the Amorite kings. On that same verse, no one uttered a word against the Israelites. The Hebrew Bible reads, no man sharpened, charatz, his tongue against the Israelites. The exact meaning of to sharpen a tongue is unclear. Ahituv writes that from its use here and in Exodus 11:7, quote, but not a dog will move his tongue, end quote, it seems to be a gesture of resentment or a threat. Septuagint has, no one of the sons of Israel grumbled with his tongue, reading Ish lebnei Israel instead of lebnei Israel Ish. Targum reads, there was no harm for the sons of Israel for a man to afflict himself.
Oh, by the way, I was thinking of the victory steel of Naram Sin. That's what I was thinking of. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Verse 24, put your feet on the necks of these kings. Kara writes that this is done to fulfill what is said in Deuteronomy 33:29, quote, and you shall tread on their backs, bamotemo, end quote. Gersonides writes that this is done so that the rest of the people will be dissuaded from fighting the Israelites. Nelson writes that placing feet on the necks is a symbol of unconditional surrender and makes Israel's victory public and certain. Dozeman comments, the imagery in this speech depicts the complete subjugation of the enemy, for example, Psalms 18:39 and 47:3, as usually undertaken by the triumphant king. Bolling and Wright identify the image more broadly in ancient Near Eastern royal conquest accounts, especially in bas reliefs. 1 Kings 5:17, which is 3 in the Old Testament, illustrates the monarchic background of the imagery in the Hebrew Bible. Quote, you know what my father David could not build a house for the name of you know that my father David could not build a house for the name of Yahweh his God because of the warfare with which his enemies surrounded him until Yahweh put them under the soles of his feet. End quote. The royal imagery is also evident in Psalms 110:1, where Yahweh identifies the king to be the priesthood of Melchizedek, while promising victory in war, quote, sit on my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool, end quote. Given the royal association of the image, the emphasis on the military leaders in Joshua 10 is noteworthy. It may represent the anti-monarchic intention of the author. Auld goes further, stating that the narrative is a commentary on, quote, the hopeless inadequacy of kingship. Verses 26 to 27, Nelson comments, hanging up bodies is a demonstrative act of contempt, as seen in 1 Samuel 31:10, 2 Samuel 4:12. DH makes sure that the law of Deuteronomy 21, verses 22 to 23, is obeyed, and compare 8 to 29. The story concludes in a satisfying manner by returning to the, quote, stones into or over the mouth of the cave, end quote, that launched the action in verse 18. The testimony formula points to these stones as visible signs of Israel's territorial claims by insisting that they be remembered as marking the graves of the land's previous claimants. Israel's title of ownership is based on the victories of its heroic ancestors, and these are certified by the witness of these stones. It was important that each generation be told that they, quote, are still there to this very day, end quote. That's it from a commentary on this part.
Okay, I just wanted to show this off. This is a Texas indigo snake, and I have named it Asherah.
Oh, hello, Asherah.
Since the name came up, I wanted to bring her out. All right, so Doug.
She wants to join the program and get on the microphone.
Yeah. And this is just a baby, of course. I mean, just like a newborn, pretty much. These get like 6 to 8 feet long. So Doug said, I'm looking at Sargon of Akkad and the siege of Enimar, the walls coming down. At a battle in Utna Raspashtim, the sun darkened, suspiciously similar. No comments? Okay. All right. Jo-
I mean,
Yep, would have been
I get it. It's a similar motif about, what we did is so important. It affected the sun, but
All right.
I
And
mean, the
I
sun,
will.
like, it's just an eclipse, so it's like much more natural and more believable.
Yeah.
And, the sun's, yeah.
All right. So resuming that
yeah.
day.
Finish the chapter.
That day, Joshua took Makkedah and put the city and its king to the sword and totally destroyed everyone in it. He left no survivors, and he did to the king of Makkedah as he had done to the king of Jericho. Then Joshua and all of Israel moved from Makkedah to Libnah and attacked it. The Lord also gave that city and its king into Israel's hand. And the city and everyone in it Joshua put to the sword. He left no survivors there. And he did to its king as he had done to the king of Jericho. Then Joshua and all Israel moved on to Libnah and Lachish. He took up positions against it and attacked it. The Lord gave Lachish into Israel's hand, and Joshua took it on the second day. The city and everyone in it he put to the sword, just as he had done to Libnah. Meanwhile, Horam, king of Gezer, had come up to help Lachish, but Joshua defeated him and his army until no survivors were left. Then Joshua and all Israel with him moved from Lachish to Eglon. They took up positions against it and attacked it. They captured it that same day and put to the sword and totally destroyed everyone in it, men, women, children, everybody, just as they had done to Lachish. Then Joshua and all Israel with him went up to Eglon to Hebron and attacked it. They took the city and put it to the sword, together with its king, its villages, and everyone in it. They left no survivors, just as at Eglon, they totally destroyed it and everyone in it. And it's absolutely believable that this always happens, and you shouldn't question a bit of that. Then Joshua and all Israel with him turned around and attacked Debir. They took the city, its king, and its villages. I bet you can guess what happened next. And put them to the sword. Everyone in it, they totally destroyed, left no survivors. They did to Debir and its king as they had done to Libnah and its king, to Hebron. So Joshua subdued the whole region, including the hill country, the Negev, the western foothills, and the mountain slopes, together with all their kings. He left no survivors. He totally destroyed all who breathed, just as the Lord, the God of Israel, had commanded. Joshua subdued them from Kadesh Barnea to Gaza, to the whole region of Goshen to Gibeon. All these kings and their lands Joshua conquered in one campaign, without losing any people, it seems, because the Lord, the God of Israel, fought for Israel. Then Joshua returned with all Israel to the camp at Gilgal.
You know what I find interesting? People have done a calculation of how many people God killed in the Bible versus how many people Satan killed. God killed over 3 million. Satan killed 10 on direct orders from God. However, in this, you only include something with numbers. If God specifically orders or personally kills people, you can only include those incidents which have numbers. They slaughtered 10,000 people here, 6 there, whatever it is, including individual cases. None of these would be included in that calculation because despite the fact that you're genociding entire cities and burning them to the ground and killing every man, woman, and child within, we have no numbers, not even a pretense at a fake number. So not even included in that.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if the people who wrote this have ever played Risk. Because when you play Risk, and you go and you start, you have your massive army, and you go to do this campaign. You take this country, this country, this country, this. You run low on people at some point, so you lose some, they lose some, and then maybe you win. But to do 5 or 6, 7, and you kill everybody every time, and you still have enough left to go kill the last 2 or 3 cities.
Yeah, you're not conscripting any of these people.
Yeah, you also don't need to leave anyone behind to guard an empty city.
No, not at all. Not at all.
So, something else too is like, what exactly does it mean when it says that Yahweh delivered them unto their hands. Like, because
Yeah,
if I think about
before
it,
they killed him.
there's an invasion happening here, and they start killing people. Soon enough, people will start rebelling. Like, we're all gonna die here. We might as well die in a fight. So does it mean that God just like zombified everyone here, and then the Israelites are like just like stabbing everyone, like they're just stabbing
I think it's just a
defenseless,
normal,
immobile people?
they win a battle and we have to give all glory to God for everything we do, no matter what it is. It's only through the power of God that I was able to pick up this glass, because I can do nothing of myself.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll start my commentary. Verses 28 to 39. Dozeman comments, the style of the southern invasion in verses 28 to 39 is repetitive. Hawk notes that the analytic style of and the fast pace of the invasion are meant to elevate the status of Israel as a powerful nation. The repeated central motifs throughout the 7 episodes reinforce this conclusion. The point of the conquest narrative is to underscore that all the cities are destroyed and that their populations are exterminated, with the exception of Gezer, the one northern site. The language of war and destruction is stereotyped for the most part. In each episode, the narrator reports that Joshua and the Israelites slaughters their opponent with the edge of the sword. Other central motifs include the description of battle, the siege against cities, the absence of survivors, divine aid, and the execution of the ban. The emphasis on the ban clarifies that the southern invasion is not a story of conquest. Rather, it is a story of identity formation, which is articulated through the imagery of extermination as an act of sacrifice to the deity. The author of Joshua uses the ban throughout the book to separate Israelites from the indigenous kings and city dwellers, whose extermination represents a religious rite of purification, followed by a new form of rural life in the land, which is restricted to the 12 tribes, the clan of Ahab, and the Gibeonites. On verse 37, together with its king. But the king of Hebron was killed in verse 26. Kimchi writes that this is a new king. Ahituv proposed that this is a language motif, just as the rest of the occupation stories. Zakovitch writes that this shows that verses 28 to 39 are not a natural continuation of verses 1 to 27. The Septuagint omits the mention of the king, probably to avoid the contradiction. And finally, 40 to 42, Butler comments, the concluding summary is somewhat repetitive, giving regions in verse 40, boundaries or limits in verse 41, and kings in verse 42. This, the section echoes the common themes of the chapter: battle success, elimination of survivors, defeated kings, and Yahweh's combat for Israel. The compiler here has a different geographical span in view, that of the Davidic Empire. Here is the land that belongs to Israel. Israel's persistent pursuit has reaped rewards. Nelson makes an important differentiation at this point. Quote, both Joshua and these ancient Near Eastern campaign reports these ancient Near Eastern campaign reports seek to increase the wonder of the accomplishments they report and to promote a certain religious and political ideology. For Israel, the ideology being advanced was not the power of the king, as in the texts from Assyria or Egypt, but their own national identity as the people of a powerful God and as the legitimate masters of Canaan, end quote. And that's it for my commentary.
All right, Eric Wander has a question. He says, Joshua 10:33 says no survivors were left in Gezer, but in Judges 129 says that the Canaanites continued to live there among them. Is this a contradiction?
Well, what it says in Joshua 10:33 is that King Horam of Gezer came to help Lachish, and Joshua struck him and his people, leaving him no survivors. So, like this army would have been taken out, not that the whole place of Gezer was taken out. So
Yeah,
I don't think it would be. But either way, we do get an indication later in Joshua that he's like, this very old man by the end of it. So a good amount of time had passed in this. So even if it was a complete destruction of the place, it's still you would have a good amount of allotted time to like.
Yeah. Now, if you're looking for that kind of contradiction, we do have the city of Tyre that was supposed to be absolutely wiped out with no survivors and turned into nothing more than a rock in the water and never rebuilt and all of that. But then later, the Bible talks about doing business with Tyrians who still exist.
Also, you can still find Tyre on Google Maps, and you can see like live satellite footage of it right now. And yes, it is in the same place it was in ancient times. It's just more because, it's bigger because it's modern times. But it is absolutely there's a Christian apologetic that pretends it's not in the original location. The original location has absolutely been destroyed. Like, no, the fuck it has not. It's in the OG. It's still there. Google Maps exists. The Bible's wrong.
The reason I brought this up is because this is the Bible contradicting the Bible. This is the Bible that says that the people of Tyre still exist after the Bible said that they didn't exist.
On Google Maps, you can not only find Tyre, you can also find where they're excavating parts from biblical times, from the old city. So,
okay,
which is in Tyre.
It's entirely entire.
Entirely.
Well, maybe this is the remaking. This is when they would retire.
Oh God.
Lawrence is going to start head desking. Lawrence, take.
Oh yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that particular problem with Tyre is overinflated. So.
Yes.
Oh God.
Okay, so did you finish your commentary?
Yes.
Okay.
Finally.
And we took a long damn time to do just 2 chapters.
3 hours.
There was a lot of genocide.
We agreed on this.
10's a long one. No?
Yeah, it was quite an important one, I would say.
I guess the ending was, it's quite repetitive, so it wasn't much to say.
Yeah.
Should I do 11, or should we leave that for next week?
I have commentary on 11. I don't mind. Whatever you choose.
See, I mean,
20 minutes.
I'd personally rather leave for next week because I still have some
seconded
stuff to get done. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Well, then it is late.
So I'll finish off with some origin.
We need the
he says a lot of stuff about this. So both Jerome and Origen wrote that the 5 kings represent the 5 senses, which hold dominion until Jesus conquers them.
Okay, so he's not aware that we have more than 5 senses.
I hate this so much. I hate this so much.
Protection for Origen.
Yeah, and
he doesn't have a sense.
It's incredible how much credibility these apostolic fathers and all the others early church generation get credit for, but they don't no one really talks about the stupidest things they say.
Yeah, magnets. What the fuck is that shit?
And how do they work?
Obviously, magic is real.
The tides go in, the tides go out. No one knows how that works.
Never a miscommunication.
So there is I wanted to bring up, I think there was some drive-by Christian in the comments who said that something about, the Canaanites or whatever, they sacrificed children, they were evil, blah, blah, blah. I just want to say, you don't save children from sacrifice by killing them in their families. It's counterproductive.
Yeah. That's not even bringing up
things to children. You're going to save them by blowing up the kids.
That's not even bringing up that we've had a couple of Bible scholars come on here and say that the Israelis were sacrificing kids too.
Not
but
the Israelis, the Israelites.
Yeah, Israelites.
Different Israelites.
I don't do that.
Subtle distinction.
Yeah, Torah doesn't do that anymore.
Come on.
He's reformed.
Yeah, hardly ever.
Yeah, I was gonna say it, and in a sense, And in a sense, like this whole thing, right, is, oh, they're sacrificing their kids to their gods. That's evil. Oh, we need to kill them, as in we need to sacrifice them to Yahweh instead.
Yeah.
That's what
Mhm.
that's what Yahweh wants.
Yeah,
It's
very. I'm sorry, I
It's so evil
I
that they're
detracted
sacrificing
from
their
your
kids
very
to
good
other
point.
gods.
yeah, it's only child sacrifice when you're killing your own kids. When you're killing someone else's kids, it's virtuous war.
Oh, and there's another comment by Origin who writes that understanding the Israelite wars as figures for the destruction of evil from souls, rather than the souls themselves, portrays a more devout and merciful view of Jesus.
Honestly, like these fucking church fathers, fucking bozos.
That's just Origin.
Right.
Like,
Yeah, I know, but like
But
even
Origin
though, like,
was
other-
3rd century. That was before Christianity got political power and got all stabby.
Yeah, it was very early on. But oh my god, like the thing is when these guys talk about theology, it actually makes more sense. Like I can follow their stuff on Trinitarianism way more than I can follow them on this kind of biblical exegesis. It's awful.
Please tell me that this is just lessons he's drawing from the text and not what he imagines the original purpose of the text to have been.
You probably have to read more.
So, the guy's still here. He says, so what? They should leave the kids alone in the wild? This is garbage. It's the same as Hamas children with AK-45s.
oh god, no.
We
please
are
don't.
in 21st
please-
century and still don't know what to do
Please
with
don't
that.
make current
Troll-
political
la- la- la-
Irresponsible.
la- la- la.
To leave children in the wilderness, so the only thing you can do is slaughter them.
Well, no
Yeah.
one has ever adopted war
the
orphans.
only two
It's
options.
It's the Christian
This is
thing
why
to
God
do.
is against abortion.
It's the Christian thing to do.
Okay.
God's favorite thing does appear to be piles of dead babies. So this is the question then. Does he like dead babies specifically, or does he just like dead everybody, babies included? Which is his favorite?
It is an
Depends
aroma
on
pleasing
it
to the
depends
Lord.
on the sacrifice.
It's like
Remember-
veal, right?
Remember, their heads must be crushed up against the rocks too. It's not just
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
unalive.
Well, I mean, that was in a psalm.
I feel like
That was in a pop song.
Yeah.
Ah,
that was
yeah,
in a
I think
song,
so.
yeah.
So
It's
much
poetic.
forgiving, loving forgiveness and mercy in this book.
Oh,
But
he
remember,
Certainly moral family
Aaron,
values.
that without
he-
this particular
he
God, you
replied
would have
to
no
something very
logical basis
constructive.
for morality because reasons. Shut up.
What were you
Yeah,
saying,
that's what he
Isaac?
said. Shut up and boo. Oh, he replied to what we were saying with shut up and boo, and this is all you know.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Well, I guess
Okay.
we're done. So thank you all. And until next week.
Join the Discord. Don't forget,
Absolutely,
Peter.
from the Discord.